Yeah, you use the very good team there. Fred passed away from me before to drive himself, Fred.
Oh, yeah. Hello, everyone. Sorry for the delay. There's been a technical issue that we've just been trying to resolve. So we, before we could go live, so we have now done that. So thank you for your patience. Welcome to this meeting of the Place Overview and Scrutiny panel on Wednesday, the 16th of July. My name is Councillor Gary Reeves, and I will be chairing this meeting. So this meeting is being held in person via Zoom and streamed live to the public on YouTube. I remind all attendees that participation in the meeting indicates consent to the audio video being streamed live and acknowledgement that after the meeting it will continue to be available in the public domain. There are no fire drills expected or scheduled for this evening, so if the fire alarm does sound, please leave via the nearest fire exit, make your way to the assembly point outside the front entrance of the building opposite the barracks. Firstly, it would be useful if all the panel members and the officers could introduce themselves so the public are aware of who is in the meeting and the role they're undertaking. So there's myself. I'll begin with me. I've already notified and introduced myself as the chair of this meeting, and then vice chair here. Okay. If we can then go to our other panel members to introduce themselves. Councillor Martin.
Councillor Shah Martin, voting member of the panel.
Councillor Gurj Singh, voting member of the panel.
Councillor Asghar Majid Ascot, voting member of the panel.
Councillor Alison Carpenter, voting member of the panel.
And so if the officers present could also introduce yourselves. If we start, we'll go this way, we'll continue up.
Ian Maxlow, I'm a Principal and Policy Officer. I'm here for the Ascot SPD item.
Hello, I'm Ian Motchell, Planning Policy Manager, also here for the Ascot SPD item.
Good evening, I'm Councillor Adam Burmant. I'm Cabinet Member for Planning, Governance and Asset Management. I've been invited to attend this evening to discuss the Ascot Supplementary Planning document.
I'm Councillor Catherine Del Campo, Cabinet Member for Adults, Health and Housing, and I'm here to talk about the temporary accommodation strategy.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Amanda Gregory. I'm the Assistant Director for Housing and Public Protection, and I'm here to talk about the temporary accommodation strategy.
Good evening all. My name's Andrew Owen. I'm the Executive Director of Board Plus.
Good evening, Mark Bealey, Principal Democratic Services Officer.
Hello, I'm Chloe Plummer. I'm a Democratic Service Officer as well.
Thank you very much. And thank you for everyone sparing your time to join us here. Rolly, I understand that you've joined online as well. Could you introduce yourself, please, as one of our co-optees?
Yeah, I'm Rolly Latif. I'm co-optee and I'm a parish council, Raisby Parish Council.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I'm Trevor Pask. I'm the Housing Strategy Manager. I'm online and I'm here for the temporary accommodation strategy.
Oh, okay. Councillor Hill, could you introduce yourself, please, as well? I understand you're online.
Good evening, Councillor Jeff Hill. I'm the Cabinet Member for Highways and Transport, IT and the Customer Service Centre and Parking. I'm here for the Ascot SPD place item. Thank you very much.
And now, Angela, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you, Chair. My name is Angela Clack and I'm the Infrastructure Planning Manager for the Council. And I'm here also for the Ascot Placemaking SPD item.
Okay, thank you very much. So I request that meeting participants do not speak unless I specifically invite you to do so. Once I've invited you to speak, before you do so, please state your name and capacity in which you're speaking, if appropriate. As most people have introduced themselves, we can forgo that, but so now we know who you are. But if you haven't introduced yourself, if you could do so. If any individuals attempt to disrupt the meeting, I am able to use my powers in the Constitution to adjourn the meeting and to have the individual removed. I would also like to remind councillors that to improve our time and effectiveness on the panel, ask that we please limit the repetition of points and questions which have already been raised by others where possible. But please put forward all new points or questions you would like raised during your request to speak. We'll now start on the agenda items. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair, received 2 apologies this evening from Councillor Blundell and Councillor Taylor.
Thank you very much. So on to the declarations of interest. So have we got any declarations of interest from panel members?
Yeah, just for the Ascot SPD, I've had conversations and been approached by residents on that one, just for transparency. I just wanted to put that there. Thank you.
There we are.
That was the same for Councillor Majid. Is that correct? Okay. So on to the next agenda item, which is the minutes. That's to consider and approve the minutes from the previous meeting, which we held on the 10th of June. I also wanted to raise a new point around potential standing agenda item going forward. It's relevant to this section, which is I feel that when we do sign off these minutes, there are a number of action items that are always contained within them. Yeah, I don't feel that we have a suitable log of those action items being completed and closed out. And I feel that that means that we're not following up appropriately and holding them to account on those action items. So my proposal, which hopefully the panel members will share, is that during this item going forward, we'll actually bring forward any action items that have not been closed. And Democratic Services will support us in that by actually creating a table of action items from every minutes, and we will actually then present anything that hasn't been closed out or been closed out since the last meeting. How do panel members feel that would be useful, and we're happy to go forward with that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So what we'll do is for the next meeting, we haven't obviously had time because this is a suggestion that I've come up with today whilst we were sitting here, is that we will actually catch up everything over the previous year and just to make sure and check that any open items are brought forward, and then we'll then go forward, carry on from there in the next meeting. Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so talking about that, are we happy to sign off the minutes from the previous meeting? Yeah?
Yeah, agreed.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, so on to our agenda item number 4, that's our temporary accommodation strategy, which we have a report summarising the proposed temporary accommodation strategy for 2025 to 2028, describing the RBWM's position, outline a range of ongoing and planned work streams to reduce the cost and increase effectiveness in this area. So if I can hand over to who's going first to present, Councillor Del Campo.
Thank you, Chair. I apologise to Amanda for going first. She will cover some more of the detail on this in her presentation. So hopefully we won't be duplicating each other. So, you know, like other boroughs up and down the country, RBWM does face a challenging housing situation. The reasons are laid out in the introduction, but are basically around the increasing cost of private rental and home ownership, a lack of social housing, and also legislative changes that were designed to help residents but then increase the burden on local authorities. RBWM is not a stockholding authority, so we are dependent on registered housing providers and private landlords. Temporary accommodation is used when we're assessing homelessness applications, when it's been found that we owe a householder duty and people are waiting to go into accommodation, and when we're supporting rough sleepers through rough sleeper grant funding. Households are expected to pay rent, it's not free, and there is some grant funding available from central government, but the gap between what we receive and what we pay out is the figure that's at around £2.7 million for 24-25. RBWM is and has been too dependent on spot placements. These offer us a high level of flexibility, as they can be booked on the day, but we pay for that with a high nightly rate, and that is clearly not sustainable. And actually, one benefit of having high numbers of households in temporary accommodation is that we can be confident that if we are able to secure longer term accommodation at a lower cost, we will be able to fill it. That's not a worry at this point. Previous administrations have favoured shared ownership and affordable rent as the preferred affordable tenure. We're clear as an administration that our preference is for social housing, as that's what's going to help our most vulnerable residents. One of the first things we did as an administration was to negotiate 32 additional social units at the Sawyers Close redevelopment. Not long after that, we discovered that the borough had previously applied for and received Local Authority Housing Fund grants, LAF for short. But I was quite concerned to learn that we were going to have to pay them back, as those grants have not been used. As a result of that, we refocused the then PropCo, now the in-house property team, to ensure that the latest round of funding would not have to be paid back. And the result of that was the 14 units of temporary accommodation in Maidenhead, which are held by the Asset Holding Company, and are now being used as temporary accommodation. We're making sure to complete the refurbishment of John West House, with the rough sleeper accommodation opening towards the end of this year and emergency temporary accommodation soon after, and that will help reduce our use of nightly spot rates. We're also working with registered providers to explore how we can use additional LAF funding to fund around 8 homes which we will hold on a lease, also reducing our dependence on nightly spot rates. I'm incredibly proud of what we've done and what we're doing now, and I'm grateful to officers for their flexibility and willingness to turn these projects around in a relatively short time span. What this strategy document will do now is to allow us to track progress against our goals and enable scrutiny, which is obviously what we're doing right now. So going forwards, one of the many things Amanda has done as Housing Director was to proactively reach out to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, MHCLG, for support. I've joined her for a couple of those meetings, and they've helped us get underneath the data, and what's clear to them and to us is that we really need to get a handle on prevention, making sure that households don't reach the point of needing temporary accommodation in the first place. We've got growth in the budget to support the recruitment of officers, to support residents in staying in their current accommodation, ideally, and where they do need to move on, securing accommodation in the private sector. Prevention is absolutely key. Also very important is reducing our temporary accommodation spend where we're not able to prevent people reaching temporary accommodation. So to that end, we'll be continuing to work with housing providers to deliver lower cost solutions. You can find more details in Appendix 1. Amanda's going to talk you through some of the things we're going to be doing. But in summary, for nightly rates, we're going to be carrying out a procurement exercise this year to benchmark and hold prices to a reasonable level. We're also exploring the use of modular housing, and thanks go to Councillors Taylor and Councillor Gertsching for their proactive engagement on this. Finally, we will have to make tough decisions where we no longer owe a duty of care to residents in temporary accommodation. But my hope is that a proactive prevention approach and support into the private sector, we can minimise the risk of that occurring. To finish up, you'll see from the document that there's a lot going on, but there's also a lot in the pipeline. And what I want to make clear, so if this is approved by Cabinet next week, that doesn't mean it's set in stone for the next 3 years. This strategy needs to flex and shrink according to demand and according to the prevailing economic conditions out there. So we are open to suggestions from councillors about how to reduce our temporary accommodation spend, either formally through this panel or by getting in touch at any time. It won't be a done deal next week by any means. I really appreciate your support in delivering on our council plan priorities, particularly giving children and young people a great start in life and opportunities through to adulthood, and helping people live healthy and independent lives in supportive communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Amanda?
Thank you. I've put some slides up. Hopefully everyone can see those. Thank you, Catherine, for introducing that. Hopefully I won't duplicate too much, but what I thought would be really useful is for me to give you a little bit of painting a picture, give you a little bit of context of what temporary accommodation looks like in the UK, and then of course in RBWM as well. So you've probably seen a lot of articles in the newspaper and the media, online in social media, around the challenges facing local authorities and housing at the moment, and the skyrocketing costs of providing accommodation, temporary accommodation in particular, when we are supporting our homelessness households. And when I say homelessness households, many people instantly think those are the rough sleepers on the street. That is part of the cohort, but these can be any individuals who, for whatever reason, often no fault of their own, have ended up homeless, where their tenancy has come to an end, or they can no longer afford the rent. And it is a challenge. So this just gives you a picture. This comes from the MHCLG with regard to the demand on temporary accommodation across the country at the moment. Obviously, there are some areas there where data hasn't come back. You'll quite clearly see the London authorities, which are that deep blue, having the most demand for their populations. I should imagine the grey areas are just where the data haven't been returned, but I would imagine that they would all be that deep blue as well. And you can see RBWM in the zoomed in part of that. You can see us, I'm sure you know what the borough looks like, but it sort of looks like the shape of the boot, rather like Italy, on the left-hand side there. We have got challenges. What we do find, because we're on the outskirts of London, those London authorities who equally have probably a much bigger problem with temporary accommodation and availability will start to look for accommodation outside of their borough. So you will find that they're probably looking at accommodation in our borough. So we're in competition with them to try and utilise the accommodation which is closest to us. So as Councillor Campo has already said, the temporary accommodation is part of our homelessness duty. There are two aspects of it. There's the short-term accommodation when in relief is the technical term. That's when we're still assessing someone's homelessness claim to make sure that they are actually homeless. Once we've done that claim, they may get temporary accommodation for a longer period of time. And that's where we've established that we have a duty to house them. Unfortunately, we don't have a duty to house anybody or everybody. It is something where there is a priority need, and that is for that reason that we have to house them. So a priority need could be someone's vulnerabilities, they could be pregnant, they could have dependent children, and those are the sort of priorities we look at. Exit from temporary accommodation is when the household enters some sort of settled accommodation. In general, people who are in our temporary accommodation are also on the housing register, and they're waiting for an offer of social housing, of which we've already heard there's a limited supply of social housing. We can also look at the private rented sector to have settled accommodation, and for that to be part of settled accommodation, there would have to be a secure tenancy for a certain period of time. We've already mentioned as well, a part of our cohort is rough sleepers that we have in temporary accommodation. That's not necessarily our main housing duty, but we get specific funding from the government to offer that accommodation. And as we've already said, our temporary accommodation is mainly in the private sector. It's a spot purchase per night, so it's charged per night, and that accommodation is both in and outside of the borough. So just to give you a snapshot of this, the situation nationally, and we've already touched on some of these things. There's several factors why it is a problem across the country at the moment. In general, if you look on the right-hand side of the screen there, the reasons for being homeless and then potentially in temporary accommodation, these top reasons are there. Family or friends no longer willing or able to accommodate. So these include things like parental evictions, and they don't tend to be just young people whose parents no longer want them to live with them. It may be generational accommodation where you've got elderly grandparents with a son or daughter who's then got a partner, then they have children and they're still in the same accommodation and they just outgrow it. The other reasons are domestic abuse, end of private rented assured short-hold tenancies, or leaving Home Office asylum accommodation. And of course, that is one of the factors in our area where we do have that accommodation provided by the Home Office within our borough. Demand long-term is really difficult to predict, but obviously when we're looking at temporary accommodation and homelessness, cost of living, and the increasing pressure on that is causing us to have more homelessness cases presenting to us. Our area, our borough is quite challenging. Rental prices are very high in the borough, and they are unaffordable to those who may be reliant on benefits or on low income. So within RBWM, I've obviously touched on what it looks like nationally. It's not so different here. The reasons that people are being made homeless mirror what is there nationally. So as a snapshot, we have around, because it goes up and down each day, we have around 353 homeless cases, which are currently being assessed at the moment. We have 845 applicants on the housing register, so they're waiting for social housing. And just on that, we get approximately 120 properties available each year through that route. So you can see how long people are going to have to wait for social housing. We've got around 320 households in temporary accommodation at the moment. We've obviously got the one asylum seeker hotel, the second one we had in the borough closed back in May. And we have around 20 rough sleepers, not always on the street. They might be sofa surfing with relatives or friends. We've had quite a steep increase in demand in temporary accommodation in the last 2 years, 45% increase, that's really significant. With that and the availability of private rented nightly spot purchase of temporary accommodation, the market really does push the price up. And where you've got lots of local authorities seeking that temporary accommodation to house their clients, that pushes the nightly rate up as well. It can get very competitive. Unfortunately, around 60% of our households are accommodated outside of the borough. There is not enough temporary accommodation in the borough to meet those needs. The cost to the local authority is around 17 to 23,000 per household per year. So where we have said, obviously, individuals do have to pay for their temporary accommodation, but those who might be benefit capped on what they can claim, the local authority housing rates, housing benefit, does not match the rental rates in our area and the temporary accommodation rates. So there is that balance which we will have to pay as a local authority to house that household. In total, we have around 6.3 million gross spend. And you can see our figures there, which are gradually creeping up with regard to temporary accommodation. Singles or couples with no children are pretty consistent at the moment, but families in temporary accommodation are rising. So when I've talked about the cost of temporary accommodation, we have that gross spend of about 6.3 million at the moment. If we don't start to address this, it's going to grow very quickly in terms of the cost to the local authority. We do have some grants which help us with our temporary accommodation costs. We have our homelessness prevention grant, although that is capped at how much we can use to provide temporary accommodation. The rest of it is to prevent people becoming homeless in the first place. We have some rough sleeper initiative funding, which I've already mentioned, which we can use some of that funding for temporary accommodation. We also receive, as a local authority with an asylum seeker accommodation from the Home Office within our borough, we receive dispersal funding to assist us doing homelessness prevention once people get leave to remain. We also have rental income, but the shortfall with our baseline budget that we have, all of the grant funding and the rental income for the last year, 24-25, that cost us an additional 2.7 million that we had to find for temporary accommodation. So what are we going to do about it? We have touched on it. As I said, this is a 3-year strategy, but it is going to be flexible. We'll be able to respond to any additional grant funding put forward by the government. And as we start to deliver on a number of these projects, we'll be looking at the next thing to try and mitigate the spend on temporary accommodation. So the key things really with what we're looking at is we're preventing homelessness in the first place. What we want to do is work early with people who are likely to be made homeless. We've got to look at the availability of affordable private rented sector housing stock. We need to increase our social housing stock. We've got to look at those exit routes of people out of being homeless. We want to get them into settled accommodation as quickly as we can. So we need to increase that social housing stock. And we need to look at the quality, affordable temporary accommodation in our borough for our residents. We don't want to be sending them into other boroughs. We want to look after them where they're close to their schools, their families, their support networks. So these are the 3 things we're looking at, and this is what is in the strategy. We're looking at supply. So we're looking at providing RBWM, rough sleeper hostel and emergency accommodation, which is John West House project. Procurement of more cost-effective temporary accommodation, securing those contracts where we know what that nightly rate is going to be and it's going to be fixed. We've got some government grant, the local authority housing grant, which is enabling us to look at either the development of like St Edmunds, which we've talked about, or the other long lease options, which are in partnership with our registered providers, those housing associations already in the borough, and we're making really good progress with that already. We're also scoping those other aspects which we can look at, modular housing, we can look at the mobile homes and things like that, as part of the scoping of what other projects we can do. Demand, we're looking at where we're also placing people and options of and out of London. I know we're not London, but we've joined into a scheme which is providing temporary accommodation and settled accommodation in other parts of the country. We're not necessarily forcing people down this route, but we do have households who are keen to move to other areas. And if we can find them affordable housing in those areas, then that scheme enables us to do all of those checks in other areas. We don't have to send our own officers. We're looking at specialist prevention services. Again, the asylum seeker hotels doing much more upstream work, and that is already successful. So instead of people, when they get leave to remain, coming directly to us to then present as homeless, we've already worked with them to secure them private rented accommodation, so they don't even come into that homelessness pathway, which is really good. We're also looking at rough sleeper, something called housing first accommodation, which is where people have wraparound services within their tenancy. So we're looking at accommodation with that. Just lastly there on the infrastructure, we need to do better management of TA placements. Obviously we are very empathetic to those who are homeless. However, on occasions we no longer hold a duty to people and we do have to move them out of temporary accommodation, unfortunately, but we need to do that much quicker. We need to work much better with our private rented sector to get people out of temporary accommodation, and things like landlord incentive schemes. We'll be looking at those sort of things, those sort of spend to save projects. We've got a couple of legacy contracts within the borough for supported accommodation. We're looking at those to see how we can reconfigure those to make them slightly cheaper. We'll also be aligning the temporary accommodation with regard to domestic abuse, safe accommodation, and the strategy we've got around that. That was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of temporary accommodation, and I hope that sort of gives you a bit of an insight as to what the strategy is about and what it's trying to achieve. It's quite difficult to talk about how much it's actually going to save. We can put some general figures against that. Of course, we're always faced with, we're doing lots of mitigation, but of course, if demand is increasing, then that's going to tip the scales with actually what we've managed to save. But I'm really positive about this strategy, really excited to start working on some of these projects and make a difference to those, those residents who have found themselves homeless and do want to stay within the borough. Happy to try and answer any questions. We also have Trevor online, who was predominantly the author of the strategy.
Thank you very much for that. I'll go to our panel members now to ask questions. Councillor Majid, you've indicated that you'd like to speak.
Chairman. Just a couple of quick questions. I'm not very up to date, but is it true when people come to you, they have to have been served an eviction notice before you will actually do anything? That's what it used to be before, wasn't it?
So there's the part of where we're looking at that relief and that homelessness prevention. So we ask people to come and present to us when they think they're going to be made homeless. And we have 56 days in which to work with them to try and prevent that homelessness. So we have that period, but yes, if we're offering temporary accommodation, that household would have to have been actually evicted at that stage. We don't put them in temporary accommodation all the time that they have a tenancy in place.
So we just talking about it earlier, sorry. So you not work with a landlord to try to prevent that eviction notice being given?
Yes, that's what we have the 56 days to do. Yeah, so we work with them for 56 days. The individuals, maybe a landlord there, maybe parents, if it's a parental eviction, we'll be looking with them to try and prevent that homelessness. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. That's not why I've heard that you sort of tell them of eviction, but how many eviction notices have actually been processed by yourself?
In terms of those presenting as homeless, I don't have those figures on me tonight. I'd have to take that away.
No.
As I said, there's lots of reasons. The top reason that people are being made homeless in our borough is what we call parental evictions. And that's where they're also living with family and the family can no longer accommodate them. That's predominantly our highest amount of numbers of coming through as homeless. But I can get those figures for you with regard to Section 21 notices.
Section 21, yeah. So one more question, sorry, Mr. Chair. Okay. On page 14, you mentioned the units costing you 25,500 per year. And then you're only getting back 7,500 in rent. Now, me and Councillor Gertrude dealt with some people who are bed homeless. We managed to find them a 4-bedroom house, which is probably one of the top ones, for £2,000, which works out to less than about £24,000. We also managed to get housing benefit, etc., for 1,800, which covered most of the actual expense. But you actually paying 25,500 for a unit. Is it not cheaper to? I think we do it with the care industry where we block up the beds for a year and we use them when we need to use them. Is that not something you looked at where you can actually get the house for £24,000, which is even £1,500 less? And then why are you not applying for housing, which should cover most of that cost?
Right, I'll try and answer most. There's quite a lot in there. So with regard to temporary accommodation and housing benefit, when someone is in temporary accommodation, they can only claim 90% of the 2011 housing benefit rates, the local housing, the LHA rates for 2011. So there's already a shortfall. You can imagine what those rates were in 2011 and what the rental is now on accommodation. So that is already capped. So that's why the rental income isn't that high, because of the benefit cap there. With regard to looking at a 4-bedroom, for example, in general, our highest need is 2-bedroom properties. We do have the occasional 4 bedrooms, but in general, it's 2 bedrooms we require. That's more into when we start to look at settled accommodation. So If we can secure private rented, then they wouldn't necessarily have to come into temporary accommodation. We can put them straight into a tenancy, which would be for around 2 years or longer, and then that would be settled accommodation. Those are both things that we are looking at within this strategy to work on. So the procurement exercise you talked about, why don't we go out and block book? That is precisely what we're going to be doing with the next procurement. Once we've got the strategy through, we're already working with procurement to look at that, to get that cheaper accommodation. But we're also looking at preventing people being in temporary accommodation in the first place by trying to get them into the private rented sector. What we've had is many households don't want to go into private rented. And that is a problem that we come across, because very often people have been evicted from private rented and they don't see it as very secure. So we do have to tackle that and look at the options, because realistically, if someone comes to us and is expecting a social housing unit, they are going to be waiting years, not months. So it is something, but again, that's part of the strategy, looking at those incentive schemes for landlords and the sort of spend to save options, so we can assist families if they're struggling to find the deposit or they need to have 6 months rent up front. Then we can look at those sort of schemes as well, because in the long run, it saves us an awful lot of money to actually enable that.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just one more question on the back of that one. You mentioned the 2011
LHA rates.
Yeah. Who do we need to approach, the government, or why can we not have that increase to 2025?
That's the government.
You're talking at 14.
Yeah.
One question coming up in the next full council then. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you. I think Councillor Singh and then Councillor Carpenter after that.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I just got to make a declaration. I just realised as it was coming through, I am a landlord as well, and I've engaged with local authorities in terms of housing and Russ Sleeper. So I just want to put that on the record. Thank you. Right, okay, where do I start? Yeah, there's a lot going on there. I'm going to be quite frank here. Don't take it personally, but I mean, looking at this report, we've got a 46% increase. The money's going up, the numbers are going up. Quite frankly, here it looks to me like you've lost control. You don't know what you're doing, and this strategy, I think, is quite light. There's a lot of good stuff in there what I like, but there's a lot of problems there. A lot of problems. When we're looking at this, I mean, even like sort of looking at the numbers here, and I've had conversations obviously with councillors about this. The properties that when we look at a £2.7 million cost, in addition to that cost, I know there's been an issue with the LAF money and sort of some money we had to return and some money we spent on St Edmund House. But when you put that capital cost in as well, on top of this and what we've spent on, St Edmund House, and I don't know what the value on that was, 4 million quid, whatever it was, and then you put the 1.7 million on John West House. And we've spent a lot of money on this, and in terms of the units that we've delivered, have we delivered as many units as we could for that money? I mean, that's just what's going around in my head. It's good that you're talking to government, but there's also other stuff that we could have been doing. Look, I understand people don't want to go in private accommodation, and sometimes if you've been offered brand new apartment, social rent, why would you want to go in a second-hand unit? So there is that. My also other concerns that I have here is, if we go look at the strategy, and we've got a fundamental problem here with housing supply. And I think the two are intricately linked. We don't have enough housing in the borough, and because we don't have enough housing, the housing that is available is scarce. And where landlords were renting the properties, what they're doing now is selling them, and people go and live in there. And there's a shortage. There's a massive shortage. So what do? You build more houses. I mean, that's the only solution. You build more units, you build more houses, and you get your social housing. Or if you don't get the housing, I mean, you get, there's plenty of SEAL and Section 106 contributions that you get. The other concern I've got is the way that the council is thinking. The feedback that I've had from residents and other landlords is the council doesn't engage. It engages very late. And the council's policy at the moment, when you talk to a resident, and you correct me if I'm wrong, the resident turns up and says, look, I've got a problem here. Council will say, stay put, don't move until you're evicted. So the landlord will go through the eviction process. They'll go to the court process. It takes 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. On the last day, when that tenant is evicted, council will engage. Right? That is poor. And I'll tell you why it's poor. Because what will happen is, I'll give you a scenario. What happens is, tenant gets evicted because he hasn't paid the rent. He owes he's renting a room or renting a flat, £700 a month. He's not paid for a month and a half, so he owes him £1,000. So what happens? Tenant gets kicked out, turns up to the council. Officers offer them temporary accommodation. They're doing it on the nightly scheme. And he's in the temporary accommodation for 6 weeks. It's cost the borough, whatever, £3,000. Then a property comes available. They go and put that tenant back in the same property that they got evicted from. The landlord's jacked the rent up to £900, and he said, I want a deposit. So they'll ask the borough for a deposit. They get £900 from the borough, and he gets £900 a month rent. And he's still not happy because his property's been left empty for 6 weeks. And that's just a typical scenario. The other thing I was going to say is, I'll let you come back on some of that stuff. So there's quite a lot there, but I've just got a few more other bits in my mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Singh. I'm not sure whether some of those were just a statement, or there was an actual question in there.
You can come back. Yeah,
you can come back on some of the aspects.
Mm.
I think the first one is, okay, I've been at the local authority about 18 months now, and I've inherited a situation that we are desperately trying to put right. The 46% increase in the last 2 years is the same as what nationally we've seen in temporary accommodation and homelessness presentations. So we are not unusual with that. And I wouldn't have said that that's directly deliberate of our inaction to deal with aspects. We are trying to react to what is a national situation, of which local authorities are. So yes, I've inherited perhaps a housing surface which needed work on it, but we are certainly doing some work on it as best we can. And as we've said, with the strategy, this is only the start. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to do everything that we want to do overnight. There are resource constraints, and I'll be honest with that. If we've only got a couple of officers to work on all of this, it is going to be a challenge. And that is a separate transformation bid that we're also putting in to be considered so that we can have some more resources, so we can tackle things quicker. I'm not sure I can talk about all the property side of things, because a lot of those projects, St Edmunds, the previous work with John West House are before my time, and the development with property company, which I'm not best placed to comment on. So I think if there's a question to take away from that, we'll have to take it away and come back. I am quite relieved that I've got planning colleagues in the room tonight who might want to come in, but obviously housing supply is really crucial to sorting out our housing situation. We're already on the back foot because we're a non-stock holding local authority. And you'll find that local authorities who have their own housing stock have a greater ability to tackle homelessness and the use of temporary accommodation. We don't have that, unfortunately. So we have to rely on the development of property and the availability of housing within the borough. Getting the right housing developed in the borough for our needs, I think, is crucial. And that's something, we've got our housing strategy coming up next year, and I'm sure you'll have that back as well to talk about. I want to do a lot more work with regard to looking at the data, with regard to our housing challenges within the borough. I've just got approval to go out and get an analyst to come and do that work for us, so we can really understand what we're looking for. And I don't want to take anything away from my planning colleagues, but obviously we're going to be looking at the local plan, and it's really crucial that we join together and talk about what that housing needs and how best we can address that through our planning ability as well. Do you want to come back on that, Ian?
Thank you, Amanda. Yeah, absolutely. We'll be starting to look at a new local plan early next year. And we know that there is a lot of pressure from the government for more house building nationally. 1.5 million new homes is what the government are aiming for, and all councils are being told to build more houses. That needs to be tested, of course, through the local plan process. But nevertheless, you know, there is perhaps an opportunity to deliver more affordable housing as far as we can through a new local plan. And that's something we'll be looking at fairly soon.
Thank you, Ian. And I think just the last, you obviously gave a scenario about tenants being evicted and not being accommodated until they've actually been evicted from the property. I mean, that is the legislation that we operate within, and our approach on that is not unusual to other local authorities at all. We work with people to try and prevent that homelessness, and that is the really key part. I mean, that is something, if as a local authority, that our administration wants us to look at doing anything different, then of course we can look at that, but there would be a cost implication. And I would say your temporary accommodation cost would increase even more dramatically if you take people where we don't actually have a duty to take them.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm just confused about the figures. You said the average is 45% increase over 2 years. We've increased our temporary accommodation 45%. I thought the national average, according to the report, was 15%.
So the increase, 46% increase, is the demand. So we're getting a 46 increase in people who are presented as homeless.
In the last 2 years.
In the last 2 years.
And what's the national average over the last 2 years?
I've got that right in front of me. When we had 15%. 15%.
Yeah.
Sorry, where are you actually looking?
If you look at the report, it's clear in the report the national increase for 15%.
Page 3 of the report.
Yeah, it says right, here we go. Blah 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 blah. An increase, right, here we go. Nationally, the figures have risen from 48,240 March 2011 to 120,000 in March 2025, an increase of 15%. In the same period, this is actually, there was actually an error in the report as well. So even in the report at the beginning, there's an error. But if you look further in the report, it actually gives the correct figure. But actually in there, it does say an increase of 15%. In the same period, RBWM have increased from 220 to 323, an increase of 46%. It's numbered page 5 on the printed report.
I think there probably is a typo there. Trevor, are you online? I don't know whether you're able to, probably just looking at the calculation of it. Yeah. Trevor, are you still online?
Yeah, I'm online. Yeah, there's the typo in the report. The
Right.
If you actually look at the if you look at the percentages of so nationally, there's all local authorities are seeing an increase in homelessness preventions and temporary accommodation. The temporary accommodation in the last sort of in recent years, temporary accommodation in Windsor and Maidenhead has increased by more than in other authorities. The reality is lots of other authorities are maintaining large numbers of people in the private rented sector by supporting the rents, and some of them aren't badging that as temporary accommodation. So the national figures are actually even higher. We're not doing as much prevention work as other authorities do. So our TA level is higher than it otherwise would have been. But if we did say what a lot of West London authorities do, our TA level would be lower, but we'd still be spending money maintaining people in the private rented sector. So the actual, we're sort of spot on in terms of prevention in terms of presentations. We're actually on the, we're more or less on the national track on that.
Are you reading that from page 3? Oh yeah, or page 5 in the report?
So can you say which point is it? It's
yeah, page 5. But okay. Can I just move you on? If I can just move you to page number 8 of the report, right? This has got more accurate figures. So it looks like there's 2 different figures in your report. So right. So this here says recent trends for RBWM are particularly concerning. In the 2 years from March 2023 to March 2025, the national use of TA rose from 104,540 to 120,456, an increase of 15%. In the same period, RBWM use increased from 220 to 323, an increase of 46%. While factors such as national property markets affect TA level, RBM use of TA is also higher than that of neighbouring councils.
Yeah.
So,
and then it says likely factors for contributing to this unfavourable position include, and then there's a series, there's 5 bullet points underneath.
Right. Okay. Right. So look, let's agree to disagree on that, right? Because to me they're concerned, and to you they're not concerned, right? And they're in line with other authority. So if we look up at the report, so RBWM temporary accommodation, we've got 318 people in temporary accommodation, and that is more than Wokingham, West Berkshire, South Oxfordshire, and Runnymede all put together. And by the end of this year, it'll be more than Bracknell Forest. It's like 70 short of all of those local authorities. I mean, doesn't that strike you as something odd there?
There are a number of factors which can come into that.
No, forget the factors. I mean, look at the numbers.
Councillor's thing, please.
Yeah. Sorry, go on. Yeah. Sorry.
There are a number of factors. Some of those local authorities have their own accommodation that they can use, and they have their own housing stock. So, like Wokingham does have its own housing stock, and that enables less people to go into temporary accommodation. The other aspect that we have in our area is the unaffordability of the private rented sector. And I would say a number of those other local authority areas have more affordable private rented. This is a very expensive area to rent in the private rented sector. And finding affordable accommodation where if you're on low income or dependent on benefits is incredibly challenging in this area. So, I'm just looking at, say, a 3-bedroom accommodation in this borough, you could be looking at £3,000 plus a month. You know, it's very expensive, and that is unaffordable if you're on benefits.
Okay. If I just move on. So look.
But we will double check those figures. I'll take.
Please, I mean, that's a concern that we've got different figures in the report. So move on from there. So look, 90% of people are on the spot day rate, yeah. But the other 10% is property that we own, because like 40 of the units that we've got people in temporary accommodation in is RBWM owned property. So if you take the RBWM, our own stock out of there, the majority, we're nearly 100% on spot. And just in terms of the you don't have to answer that, but in terms of the strategy, what I would like to see is something like a have a look at a longer term lease, because on these properties, because at the moment we know we've got 300 people in temporary accommodation, and unless we set like a clear target for, you know, in the paper, and we say, look, there's no target there. If we say, look, we'll reduce nightly rate by 50% within 18 months, we could say that, but I know that's not going to happen. But if, for example, we know we've got 300 people in temporary accommodation today, and we'll have 300 people in temporary accommodation in 3 years' time, it's very difficult to change that. So why don't we try to have some long-term stock and bring the price down? Because we're probably paying about 40%, 30% extra on these apartments. I mean, one-bedroom apartment, we're paying £1,800, and the market rate, even in this area, is probably about £1,200.
Thank you, Councillor Singh. That is one of the aspects of the strategy.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about is to have some control in there in terms of fraud, and people presenting themselves as residents. Nationally, this is a problem, and I've heard that, you know, people are using fake documents to gain temporary accommodation and get on the list. I just wanted to ask you is, can you tell me, since you're 18 months what you've been here, have you had any occurrences when these people have been identified, or whether you think it would be helpful to have that as part of the strategy, to have a fraud prevention scheme where we check documentation, and not only do we check documentation, we also check with authorities where these individuals may have come from, so we could cross-check their records.
When we have homelessness cases presented to us, we do a number of checks, and those checks will be done with regard to all documents and identification. That's already in place. I can't give you a figure of how many were maybe fraudulent. I don't have that in front of me, and it's not really part of what this strategy is about. This strategy predominantly is around that. Although we've got homelessness prevention within there, this is really around securing cheaper temporary accommodation, and that's what this strategy is around. There is already measures in place to deal with fraudulent cases and making sure that all of those homelessness checks are done, and there are significant checks done. I mean, if someone has got evidence that they think that those checks aren't being done, then I'm happy to look at those. I am conscious there's very often things put on social media which aren't true. So, you know, if you do have evidence and you do want us to look into something which you've been told about, then please do bring it to us.
I mean, so in terms of fraud, there are local authorities that have had issues with this, and they've got their in-house fraud teams. You're talking about cost cutting, but I'm also talking about saving money. So where there could be potential issues in the borough, you know, there's all sorts of methodologies. I mean, there's like a national database that we can use and we check against, but there's also sort of localized things that a lot of councils are doing, and that's what I was talking about.
Yeah, and we are part of the National Fraud Initiative, and things will come through like that. So I think that's already covered off, but that is slightly outside of the strategy.
That's not part of strategy. Thank you.
Councillor Singh, if it's okay, we can go on to other panel members.
Yeah, the last post. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And with regard to the fraud aspect, I do remember I was sitting on the panel recently, and which was the audit and governance, and we do actually have a person that specifically looks into fraud. They are actually at the moment saving money for us in other areas, and then so they are, and they did mention that there are other areas that potentially they could look at. So we'll put it down as a proposal that maybe that could be something that person also looks into as well.
Yeah, that's good. Okay.
So we will put that market as a something to look into, whether that could be on their part of their work program.
Yeah, good idea. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Carpenter, please.
Thank you. Now, I really support the principle of moving towards this more sustainable and effective approach to temporary accommodation. To recognise the hard work that's gone into this, so thank you very much. So I'm from Clewer and Dedworth East, and it's one of the most deprived wards in the borough. And nearly every week I'm contacted by a resident who's been placed outside the borough in temporary accommodation.
and they're not always from my ward, so I just get contacted with lots of people. But you know what, they're often far from their children's schools, their support networks, and everything that's familiar to them. So, you know, we absolutely have to do something about this, as you know, we all know. But quite often the accommodation they're put in is not fit for purpose. You know, I've reported to cases to you where there's mold, very poor conditions. You know, a lady moved in with her baby and there was mold and all sorts of things. So, you know, as we scrutinise this strategy, can we be assured that, you know, these issues are going to be addressed, that at least we, you know, if we do have to put these people outside of our borough, you know, can we make sure at least they're in, you know, safe and suitable standards, you know, that we would expect, because it's still, you know, a home that they've got to live in. So, you know, that seems to be a big theme, that, you know, a lot of these landlords just, oh, it's just temporary, we'll just put them in, and they're horrible conditions. So that's first thing. Quite a lot of the people I've spoken to say they can't get hold of their housing officer, or they're just told that's it, that's your lot, tough. You know, and it's that sort of language, and you know, I'm sure that might not be the case, but you know, maybe a bit more empathy might be needed, or because you know, a lot of these people are going through a lot of trauma for whatever reason. Obviously, moving people out of our towns and out of our boroughs has an impact to our town as well, and the whole infrastructure. So it's better to try and keep people in if we can. So I've got a couple of questions. So I see the report highlights that only 51% of the homelessness prevention grant can now be used to offset temporary accommodation costs, which I think creates an estimated 208,000 extra pressure if numbers stay the same. So how are we planning to bridge that gap and reduce the overspend? That's my first question. Do you want to do one at a time, or I've got three?
I don't mind.
Yeah,
we can do that one and then we'll come back.
Do that. Yeah.
I mean, that is what the strategy is around, reducing that spend to try and, because that gap is only probably quite a small gap in terms of the big gap we've got at the moment. When we're talking about last year, we spent 2.7 million that we didn't have within the budget. So the challenge of the homelessness prevention grant is there. That's new this year because that's been brought in by the government. I think probably because many local authorities might be in a similar situation to us, and they're trying to use as much as they can on temporary accommodation. The key now is to doing much more better homelessness prevention, absolutely, and that's part of our transformation. We need, with growing demand, we do need to grow our workforce in that area to meet that demand, so that people are available to talk to. A lot of it is online, so people have to log in online. I know not everybody likes to do that, and that does make contact very difficult. We have got to look at those numbers to match the huge increase we've had in demand. So absolutely, but that is what this strategy is around. It's about bringing down that budget spend on temporary accommodation. Totally take your point around the communication, which I've just talked on, and take your point on, you know, the out of borough accommodation. If it's in borough, our officers go out. It's more difficult, particularly out of borough. Most of it is in Slough, so that's not too much of a problem. But where we've had to place further afield, sometimes it is difficult to do those additional checks. Temporary accommodation will be basic accommodation, but it still needs to be livable and still needs to meet standards. If we have any accommodation like that which is brought to our attention within the borough, then that is where we instigate our environmental health residential team, who deal with the private rented sector with regard to the housing health and safety rating system, and can deal with those issues with the landlord. It's much more difficult outside the borough. We do notify the local authorities if there's an issue and the landlord isn't fixing it. But we can't always guarantee that there will be a response. So we then have to seek further accommodation, which again isn't great for those who are in that accommodation because they've got to move again. You know, I completely take that on board, and that's what we want to try and get away from. We want to house our residents in our borough.
Okay, great, that's really good to hear anyway. I mean, you know, talking about a lack of affordable accommodation, I mean, you know, affordable, even at 2,000 a month, you need an income of 60,000, you know, to do private rented. So, you know, that's a huge amount, and quite a lot of landlords won't take people who are on any form of benefits. you know, they might have pets and all sorts of things. So, you know, it is quite a traumatic time for people to find rented accommodation. And when we talk about affordable housing, even, you know, planning meetings, it's not affordable to most people. So, you know, that's why we have such a huge issue here. So, you know, I mean, I've had to move 3 times in the last 4 years because my landlord has sold the house, right? So I know exactly what it's like. It is horrendous. And, you know, you never know whether your house is going to be, you know, how long it's going to be your home for. So you've got that as well. So that's also horrible. A couple of other questions. So are we doing anything about empty properties in the borough? Because I know there's nearly in every road, there's an empty house or two that, you know, there might be reasons for it being empty, but, you know, it's sitting there empty. I mean, the house I moved out of, for example, you know, it sat there empty for 2 years. It's really annoying because I could have stayed there. But, you know, it's that sort of thing that, you know, is there anything we can do about that? Can we work with housing associations to look at temporary housing solutions? I spoke to ABRI the other day. I don't know if they've spoken to you yet. The project manager at Sawyers Close was talking about how he'd built some, or helped to build some temporary accommodation in London, you know, and it was temporary, but it, you know, might solve our problems. It might be worth speaking to them. I think that would be really useful. And just my final point, you mentioned about parental evictions, and I know that, I think I heard somewhere that we've got a new rule that says they can stay in their property, you know, we suggest they stay with the parents. And I think this is quite a big problem because, you know, some, I'm not saying all, but some might use this to get their children on the housing ladder because, you know, they think that that's a shortcut. So, you know, I think that has also caused a bit of an issue in terms of the volume as well. So if there's anything we can do about that, you know, yeah, thank you. I think that's my questions.
Thank you. Empty properties, absolutely, that is something that, apart from the work around council tax, there hasn't been a huge amount of work on empty properties. It is a difficult area to deal with. It's not necessarily the answer to all our housing problems, but it can have an impact. I've mentioned a transformation bit that I've got in at the moment with regard to housing staff. So within that is a request for additional funding for an empty property officer to do some work and then to start to develop a strategy around that. So not being approved yet, but that is within that. And that individual would work with the private rented sector team as well and work closely with them, which is a new team that I'm looking at. With regard to the housing associations, we are already involving them as part of the strategy with regard to temporary accommodation. Our 2 main providers in the borough that we're looking at is ABRI and Housing Solutions. We do meet with them regularly. We are talking to them about those projects. We did have a meeting, gosh, that was only last week, wasn't it, Andrew, I think, with the Housing Association, where we were talking about more of those modular home projects, how can they assist us with those. So we are starting to have those discussions, just not formulated a particular plan around that yet, but just to reassure you, we are having those conversations. I can't remember, there was another question in there.
Just about the parental eviction.
Parental evictions. Obviously, we always look at those individual circumstances. We looked at the allocations policy this year with regard to social housing to try and put some incentives in there to try and stay within the properties. The parental evictions, particularly of young people thinking they will get a bigger step onto the housing, social housing, has always been there. That is a bit of a misconception at the moment. The priority need that you'll get will be based on your needs. So that is a tough one to crack, but that is something that we do work around with regard to those discussions to try and prevent that homelessness. Thank you.
Okay.
I just
I think is Councillor Majid did indicate, and then I was going to Councillor Carpenter, and then Councillor Martin. Okay, Councillor Majid.
2 very quick questions, Mr. Chairman. Can we put numbers on these reports, please? Next time, so I'm not quite sure what page you're on. At the bottom of the page, please, yeah.
it's because it's an additional supplement, it's got a slightly different page numbering.
Okay, no problem.
Creates a bit of confusion, but yeah,
Yeah,
normally it's in the main agenda pack.
Thank you. So on table 3 where you've got the comparable PA.
Sorry, Councillor Majid.
So table 3 where you put down comparable TA numbers December 2024. I think when you answered Councillor Singh's question, you mentioned that the other boroughs have different housing stock and affordable housing figures, etc. I think them two you mentioned. Also on there it says that we have competition from London authorities. Can we have these figures in that report so we can then compare how well we are doing compared to the other boroughs, and also maybe we can plan our strategy based on these figures as well?
We can have a look at the figures. I'm not sure what is available to put those in with regard to those additional factors that you've said. I don't know whether Trevor can answer that, but if we've got them, we can look at putting them in.
We could find out. We can find out the actual profile of the other neighbouring boroughs exactly. On the returns they make to central government, they'll say how many nightly rates they've got, how many of their own stock they're using, etc. We can get those figures. What is very hard to get, almost impossible, unless you're actually an officer working in one of the London boroughs, is actually exactly what they're doing in terms of procuring out a borough, because there is an agreement amongst some of the London boroughs to tell each other what they're doing and not actually step on each other's patches, but they don't actually they don't. There's an agreement within London to inform another borough what you're doing. Not everybody agrees to that, and they certainly tend not to tell boroughs outside London or elsewhere what they're particularly doing or what they're charging or which landlords they're talking to, because they will purely see it as a commercial operation they're doing. So and a particular thing needs to be teased out in this is because of the transport links. Moving somebody, if you're a West London borough or even a Central London borough now, because the Elizabeth line, placing somebody in temporary accommodation in the home counties is actually significantly cheaper than if you're a Central London borough or basically any London borough. And the transport links to Slough and to this borough because of the Elizabeth line are a lot easier than lots of neighbouring boroughs. And it's more like an inner city borough. So in terms of if a London borough gets challenged on a placement well out of their area, they can say, well, look, it's effectively part of London. It's 45 minutes travelling from, I don't know, Hammersmith, for example, without naming a particular borough. Anybody in central London with the Elizabeth line, it's 45 minutes away. That's a reasonable allocation. People can work. It's not in the middle of nowhere. It's effectively like a suburb of London. That's what they would argue. And I think this borough is particularly susceptible to those kind of placements, if not directly, also Slough, because we would predominantly, when we go out of borough, we're thinking of going to Slough, but we're facing enormous competition from colleagues in London that've got sometimes 10 times the numbers of people we've got in temporary accommodation. So that's the answer to that.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can I just add to that? Sorry, Chairman. Local authorities do have a requirement to let us know if they're placing on our borough. So we could put figures like that in there. What we won't have is that for other local authorities. And it's can't always guarantee that is right as well.
But I have heard from Nigel and yourself that there's 3 figures that you can provide. So if we can put those in there, and we can have a post-meeting update to the strategy that's included. I think, is that agreed? I think, Amanda, you're nodding, and I can't see Nigel, but I'm assuming he's nodding as well. Okay, so Councillor Majid will have those added. Can
you just really help with the strategy?
Yeah, to know whether they're doing it in their own housing or whether they're having to do on the spot. So we'll get that table expanded on. Yeah. Okay, that will be done. That will be an action item. Is there anything else, or can I move on to?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the point. It was a good point, and we'll get that as an action item. So then, Councillor Martin.
Yeah, I just had a question around, because we've obviously got a housing shortage here, and you mentioned landlord schemes making those attractive. I'm just wondering, want to know a little bit more about how that works. Would that even be, say, people who are in a temporary position, maybe they want to let the house out for 6 months, or, is it more longer term with private landlords? And also, there's a trust issue just surrounding landlords as well, where people have had bad experiences in the past. Do you have a bank at all of like trusted landlords at all, or is that not in your remit to do that? Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of your first query about someone who might be looking at a landlord incentive scheme but only want to rent for 6 months, our landlord incentive schemes are going to be around putting people into settled accommodation. So you've got to look at more long-term tenancy agreements. So probably a minimum would be 2 years. So if you just want to do that for 6 months, no. If you wanted to have a property and offer it up as temporary accommodation, then potentially yes, but I'd recommend people probably look at some letting agents and talk to management agents.
Or the TA side for the short term, but yeah.
In terms of trusted landlords, no, we don't have a scheme like that. Obviously, we have licensed houses in multiple occupation. That is licensing done by our environmental health residential team, and there is mandatory licensing with that. Obviously, we do have renters reform coming in at some point, either later this year or next year. And there are potentially some elements of that which looks around more licensing type things. So there are minimum standards that rental accommodation and environmental health would investigate any of that. But as a list, no, we don't. That potentially is part of the procurement exercise.
Yeah. Can I just come back on just So if I was a landlord, let's say, how would I get onto the scheme? How would that, how would you present that as being attractive to me? I'm just wondering how you go about that for people who might be considering it.
In terms of a landlord incentive scheme, I mean, that would be something that really we're looking at existing landlords in terms of that initially, with regard to those tenancies. And I suppose what the landlord scheme would be if the rent is a certain price, but we add on an additional enhancement in terms of a supplementary payment, which would be more than probably what the rental rate would be. It would be over and above that, but it would be cheaper for us to do that rather than putting someone in temporary accommodation. So, it's something we could look at more short term. I think if anybody wants to rent out their accommodation, you're better off going and seeking. If you're not renting it out at the moment, you need to go and get some advice on how you do that. So you could go and get your own legal advice, or you could approach a management agency and estate agents who could manage that property for you. And I think if someone's just starting out on rental, that's where you need to go first to get that advice.
Yeah, it wasn't me personally, but
oh.
Sorry, Councillor, can I just say one thing on the back of that? When you go to university and you try to find accommodation, they always have a list of prepared landlords. Is it possible to use that policy, what they use, as a basis for going forward for getting preferred landlords? Because obviously it works in all the universities.
Just think from the trust side,
Yeah.
So if we could just ask the question.
I mean, there's obviously going to be the procurement exercise that we're doing with temporary accommodation. I think we're probably getting away from temporary accommodation and starting to look at more settled accommodation with helping people find a forever home or, more permanent accommodation. I sort of go back to, the HMO licensing, the renters reform, what might come through. If we do some sort of informal, discretionary type licensing or registration, then we're going to have the resources to go with that to actually instigate that team. We don't have that at the moment. That would have to be a growth bid to do it. So we'd have to look at the advantages of why we put something like that in place. But I'm quite happy to talk to Councillor Campo about whether that is something that she would like us to explore and what the resources would be around that.
Okay. I think we're happy to. We asked is a new question and a question, Councillor.
Yeah, just
we've had quite a lot of.
No, we have. No, thank you. No, just general, just to get them a better understanding, really. about
So
this.
it's a question.
Yeah.
A different question.
Yeah, I've got a couple ideas, but if we're running out of time, I know it's an important item.
Ask the question.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to ask, do you know how long are people on average in temporary accommodation?
Bear with me, I do have a graph I can share with you. Sorry, a brief bit of delay. So we've got length of. Right. So here, on this graph here, we've got TA levels and placement and the reasons for homelessness there. Length of stay in temporary accommodation, this was at April 25. 40% had been in temporary accommodation for 1 year or less. 45% had been in there for 1 to 2 years, and 15% were 2 to 5.5 years.
So 15, the first one was in there for 1 year or less, was it?
1 year or less.
Okay. So I just want to come back. Yeah, look, what my thought is, I mean, you must have thought about this. I mean, what about if you just get rid of the nightly fee and you have the strategy, you start with a monthly fee, a monthly rate, strict monthly rate. I mean, that would considerably bring your costs down, wouldn't it? Because if you're on average, if someone's in there for a year, let's say you have a monthly contract or even a 6 month or a year. What I'm trying to get at, I'm just trying to think is, I understand the nightly fee and everything, and sort of it does help sort of officers with the sort of resource and everything, makes life a little bit easier because the way the licensing works. But what about if we just change the way of thinking? Because, you know, I mean, I'm being critical, but I mean, I'm trying to sort of be a critical friend, yeah. And because this pressure that sort of we're having with when it comes in terms of temporary accommodation and the cost pressures putting on the borough, it's going right across the whole borough. You know, we haven't taken money from here, then everywhere. And if we can chip off, you know, 5%, 10% this year, that would be a considerable amount of money. I know it's aggressive, and I know it's going a bit harder, but it's just your feedback. Thank you.
You asked the question. Can we actually get the answer to the question rather than keep elaborating on your question? Is that okay? Yeah. I'm just conscious of time. I'd just like to get the answer and then just move on.
I'm not sure I quite get the question. There are 2 elements in the strategy. One is about procurement of cheaper nightly rates. The other one is around long leases. They're both within the strategy as presented.
Yeah.
So I think that both tackles what you are talking about. I think if you're saying we instantly put in a cut-off, practically I don't see how we can introduce that overnight without what we'll end up with is a load of landlords evicting their tenants and compounding the problem. We've got to remember there are other local authorities in the queue behind us that if we don't want to pay that nightly rate for that accommodation, there's someone who will pay it. So I don't know whether that really answers your question, because I'm not quite sure what you're getting at with if we cap the payment now, the landlords will turn around and say, well, actually, we're going to sell it to that local authority, not you.
I think if I can step it, what Councillor Singh was saying is not pay the nightly rate, but go straight into doing a monthly rate. Would that then make it cheaper because they seem to stay for long periods of time rather than just a one night here and there? I think his question was, why aren't we doing more monthly rates with the landlords rather than the one nightly, or rather than just negotiating nightly rates?
A lot of it is around the model that landlord has. So they will only sell it on a nightly rate. We can explore those, and of course we've got those elements in the strategy about longer leases, and that is in the strategy, but a lot of that won't necessarily be able to put in overnight. We've got to do some procurement with regard to that because of the overall cost. But a lot of the models that the landlords use will be a nightly rate if they're using it for temporary accommodation. They don't necessarily want to rent out for a month at a time.
Councillor Singh? it seems to be the landlords is the answer.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it just seems highly unusual. I mean, I've never come across a landlord that wants to rent their property for the night. I mean, I know it's a recent thing, and at the moment it's a bit of a trend. But what's happening is actually the landlords aren't generally directly renting on the night. It's they're renting to an agent and a broker, and the broker's going to the local authorities and renting. That's my understanding. You're not going directly to every single 300 landlords. You're going to the brokers. So the middlemen, obviously, they take a big cut of profit. But anyway, I'll move on anyway. But I just wanted to ask another question. I mean, and there was a question that was asked by the borough. There was a call for information by the council, and they were asking about information about the removal of illegal occupants and how do you deal with this issue. And I just want to see if do we have an issue with this, or was this a general question that was asked by the council? There was a call for information.
So is this in regards specifically to
temporary accommodation? Yeah, it was in regards to temporary accommodation. Yeah, it was an information sharing invitation
about illegal occupants of temporary accommodation.
Yeah.
Are the council is your question? Are the councils placing people illegally?
No. This was the question was the removal of illegal occupants.
Right.
Occupants, in there legally in properties, and the council was asking how do you deal with this? I mean, do we have a problem with that? People.
I think it's slightly outside of what the strategy is, but because that's about reducing the spend on temporary accommodation.
Yeah.
If there's someone in the property who shouldn't be there, then obviously that would be dealt with. That might not be the local authority, it might be the landlord who we've placed them with. So that I'm not quite sure. I can't answer that now. We can go away and have a look at that. If you can probably put that question to me in writing. You said we've had a request for information. Again, I don't know about that. It's not something which has come across my emails, but if you've got a specific question on that, we can take it.
If I can just put if someone has brought forward a request for freedom of information, or they put forward a request, then that will just happen anyway. So the information will be shared as part of that. We don't need to deal with that here, Councillor Singh. We will just need that process to take effect. And then the information will be revealed under an FOI.
No, it's not an FOI. This is done by an officer of the council. That there was an invitation to share information with RBWM. RBWM put on the government portal a list of questions that they wanted information on in regards to temporary accommodation. This was in January this year, and it's basically to learn more about this. And I just thought that was an odd question to ask. I just thought is that an issue that we have as a local authority? Maybe that might be the reason why we're doing nightly license rather than monthly, but it was just something that sort of surprised me why we asked that question. But that's all. Thank you.
If you don't know,
yeah. If you don't know, I mean, it's your department, but if you don't know, you don't know. Thanks.
Yes, it is my department, but I've got a very broad area.
Yeah.
And if there was a government consultation or a request for information, it wouldn't necessarily be sent to me. But I can, if you email me with what your query is, I can take that away and provide you with an answer.
Thank you.
All panel members happy with all questions asked? I normally, the way I chair things is to let the panel members speak, and then I will only ask things if it hasn't been covered from things that I've seen. And I'll apologise because we do have to spend a tiny bit more time on this, because I do have a particular question around the management costs. So there's a management fee mentioned in here, and it talked about until 2017, the management fee for non-London local authorities was £60 per week, each unit of temporary housing that's utilised. And then it was recognised that was then subsummed into the HPG. And then there's now a restriction, though, that grant that's been given, the central government have said that it can only be capped by 51% to be used for that. So the 49%, are you able to use that towards the management? Because one of the things that you mentioned has been mentioned as a clear risk is things around like staff costs to try and help manage the situation of temporary housing. That was a very key thing within this statement within here. This is the only thing I can see where it's almost talks about money towards that, and that it's now been put within the HPG. So the question is, what element of that HPG can be used, or are you using, to help support the management costs that you have around handling temporary accommodation? Because when I calculated it, £60 per week per unit, and if we've got 320 in temporary accommodation, I thought that was 320 units. So you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's how I did the calculation. In a year is nearly £1 million. It's 998,400 in management fee costs that we've lost, that's been put into the HPG, and 51% of that then goes down to 1.4 million. So I think there's another 1.1 million, which is the 49%. So I just need to understand, where does the other 49% go to, and are we leveraging that properly?
So I think part of your question probably to be to the government around how they calculate our homelessness prevention grant in terms of what we get. The 51% is purely the accommodation costs. The 49% will be our incentives that we're doing. There'll be some staffing costs in there, some non-temporary accommodation costs. I don't know if that answers that. Obviously, that £60 was subsumed into the homelessness prevention grant quite some time ago now. Yeah. The only thing that the MHCLG has also informed us about is that that is being looked at again in the next year. So when we get the notification about our homelessness prevention grant next year, it's likely to be that the homelessness prevention grant will be one grant, and temporary accommodation will be calculated elsewhere and come as a separate grant. But we've not had the detail on that at the moment. We're expecting that at the end of the year. I don't know whether Trevor, if I've not answered that correctly, whether Trevor...
Yeah, just a bit of, yeah, I'll give you a bit of, quickly, I'll give you a background information on the management fee. I mean, the subsidies local authorities get to support TA are a fraction of what they were pre-2010. So there's a management fee element. The original way, the original justification for removing the management fee was it was thought it was incentivizing local authorities to place people in TA, because the more people you had in TA, the more subsidy you got in terms of a fee. But that was kind of removed to encourage basically to encourage local authorities not to use TA. And but Amanda said, it was subsumed. The homelessness prevention grant now is several of the grants that were more significant have all been absorbed into it, and it's gradually being cut over the years. So it's just like an historical artifact. It's pointing out that local authorities used to get significantly more funding to support this area of activity. That's why the management fee was mentioned.
Okay, but so obviously the management hasn't gone away, or the cost to us to manage this. So you mentioned that there were some staff costs within the 49%, but is that able to be used for the same people that help to evaluate temporary housing supply, or where we can get it from? Or is it just at the first point of trying to prevent homelessness in the first place?
It's more around homelessness prevention. I think the actual staffing costs we've got, are quite big in other areas. And we've got other budget for that, and we've got a transformation bid in as well to have some additional funding. But in general, the homelessness prevention grant and the terms and conditions around it is around that homelessness prevention.
And then I was looking at the LHAF 3, and I did take it on board, the fact that it was not used previously, so therefore we lost it, I'm assuming. And you talked about having to pay it back. I didn't get a clear answer. Did we have to pay it back, or did we not? And did we lose it because we didn't spend it? I'd just like to understand, have we had lessons learned from that? And have we now utilised those lessons learned in the LHF3 implementation? Because if we haven't, that is definitely something that we need to do, because we can't let that happen again. You know, these funds aren't easy to come by, and we should be using them. And I can see that we are going to be using the LHAF3 in the procurement of long leases, and we've talked how long leases are really important. And it says the procurement of the units to be completed by April 2026. Will that take immediate effect and then actually give us some reduced costs within 25-26? Because we're going to come up with another increased shortfall, it says predictive, of an extra almost 200,000, so we're then up to 2.9 million. So I'd like to understand, when that happens, what sort of effect that's going to have for us, you know, in a positive.
So with regard to the local authority housing fund, the LAF funding, the prior rounds of that were before me starting with this local authority, so I can't really comment on those.
It's not to blame,
what I will say is, with any grant funding from the government, there will be grant conditions with it. The previous LAF grant rounds made it very difficult for local authorities to take it up. It was very restrictive on the type of properties you could use it for. And I know calculations were done and it just didn't stack up. For us, it would cost us more money, because it would only provide a percentage of the cost of purchasing that accommodation. It would have to be match funded, and I think the split was something like 40% LAF funding, 60% local authority. So, you know, it just didn't stack up. With regard to LAF 3, the reason we have gone for that and are making it work is because it was around temporary accommodation. The previous rounds were not around temporary accommodation. So this one it enables us to provide that temporary accommodation. The partnership work on the long leases is with the housing associations. We are progressing well with that. One of the housing associations is looking at the first purchase of the first properties. How quickly we will start to receive savings on that, or obtain savings, depends on how many of those units we get purchased as quickly as possible. They are intending to purchase those accommodation units on the open market. In general, there'll probably be ex-council stock that they can purchase within their areas that they manage. Trevor might be able to give me more of an indication of whether they've really gone down the route of how far they are down with purchasing those. But yes, the money has got to be spent by 2026. We don't want to give that money back. If there's any issues with our partners purchasing that accommodation, then we will have to look at other options as well, and maybe the use of our own asset holding company for that.
And it's interesting because obviously we're a non-stock holding authority, and I keep hearing that that's really hampered us in this situation. And I've asked previously, is there any method for us to, you know, is this the only method that we can adopt as an authority going forward, or is there a way that we can change the policy in the way we act as an authority? Because we're very reliant on the housing associations and also the developers to even bring the stock to us. And that kind of leads me into the main one of the other things that I really want to ask about is that, are we looking from a policy perspective in the near future to change the percentage split of affordable and social housing? Because the mix needs to change. We're not obviously meeting the gap that's quite obviously there. So are we, from a policy perspective, looking at changing the percentage and the mix? And it's probably not, Amanda, a question for you, but we have some lead members here from planning who decide policy. So that's my question.
If I just come back on the query about non-stock holding local authority, when we say that it's in reference to social housing, we don't have any of our social housing stock. If we want to become a stock holding local authority, we can do that. We can proceed in doing that. There would again need resources provided for us to actually instigate that, along with finance, because we would have to set up a housing revenue account to start setting that up. We do have opportunities with our asset holding company and the property company, and there are discussions and actually a workshop taking place this week where we are looking at those further opportunities around having housing assets that we can utilise for temporary accommodation or for assured short hold tenancies by using our property company, but that's still works in progress at the moment. It would have to be a policy decision whether we wanted to go down the housing revenue account route. With regard to the percentage of affordable and social housing, I'm going to pass you over to my planning colleagues or Councillor Blanche to answer that.
And very briefly before you do, Adam, it gives you a bit more thinking time. Just picking up on the property company or that we've brought in-house. You tell me yes or no, and we don't have to go into the detail. It doesn't appear to be in that. You know, is it in the strategy that we're adopting to actually leverage the property company around, you know, more temporary housing? Because it's not mentioned in here as a mechanism, but you've obviously brought it up. So if it's something that you have to take away, and you said it's not quite ready, I think it's something that needs to be maybe brought forward as part of the process when it goes to be full cabinet. That is maybe something that could be considered to be added if it's not already in there.
Absolutely, as we both said at the beginning, this is going to be a flexible strategy. It's going to have to grow as we grow, and as we deliver things, we're going to have to look at further developments. So this is just really the starting process. The 3-year review is there because we want to review it in 3 years, but there's nothing stopping us reviewing that strategy sooner rather than later. I think the property company and the options with that really are just currently being looked at. There'd be a lot more scoping to do, which is why it's not in this strategy at the moment, because we need to formulate that first. But certainly I feel positive, I know Andrew's keen as well, that we will start to look at that and fully scope it out for future inclusion.
Because it seems like it's a key that we can unlock from temporary housing strategy perspective, because although we can't at the moment hold social housing, it sounds like we can actually on the temporary housing side of things. So I think that we need to unlock that as part of this strategy, and I'd like you to take that as a suggestion going forward, that it should be included within your thought process, even if it's not yet done, but that it is part of what you're going to consider going forward. So that's it. And then that's just the final thing is about the policy, please, around the mix of social housing, because it seems to also be what helps us further down the line.
Yeah, certainly you're quite right, Gary, that the mix is critical, and in terms of delivery, what I'd say about that is whilst working with within the current policy constraints of the BLP, what we've been able to do is adopt a new affordable housing SPD. Part of that process looked at newer evidence, and we were able to push the envelope in terms of the ratios that we would expect when it comes to the social rent compared to other so-called affordable tenures. But I think even more importantly, it also it looked at another dimension. It looked at the number of bedrooms that are needed in those different tenures. So there's sort of more granularity there than the original BLP policy itself, and that we are using that. Developers are now having to apply those principles to schemes that come forward, and I'm positive about that. I think in the future though, there certainly is more work to do, and of course the fact that the central government have asked all authorities to start preparing new local plans, that provides an opportunity to revisit evidence bases and update our policies accordingly. So I'm not going to. I'm saying we're not going to sit around and wait for a new plan to be to emerge. That is something that will take a number of years. We have already done a lot of work, and we're pushing the envelope using our affordable housing SPD.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'm happy to close the agenda item on that, if everyone is okay. I think we've actually delved into this fine. I'm really conscious about how much time we have actually spent. Councillor Del Campo.
Yeah, just to be clear on what what recommendations, if any, are coming out of this discussion? Because, you know, cabinet is next week, so we need to move quite fast.
Yeah, so we've been capturing those as well, and we'll close all of those out for you so that we can actually make sure, you know, there's been a lot discussed, but what I want to do is we have identified a couple of the action items, and we will, as we've done previously on other scrutiny panels, is to actually then summarise that and then put across a proper recommendation, and it'll be put before me as chair, and then we will then clarify that for you. I don't want to spend more time just going through and listing them all off for you, because there was a lot. And I can recall the ones that I just asked and recommended. But that's why obviously we have an amazing democratic services team sitting next to me, who've been vehemently capturing everything. But it's a good question. We will give you recommendations. All right, thank you. We have another agenda item to go to next, which is our Ascot placemaking, our Ascot SPD, and but I'm conscious it's 10 to 9, and we've been going for already an hour and 50 minutes from the start. I don't want to hold up because I think most of the people in the public gallery have also been waiting for this as well, this part of it. And we have some public speakers as well. But I just want to ask if we can please have a 5-minute comfort break for people, and then we will come straight back and we will get straight underway. No longer than 5 minutes though, please. We will start at 5 to 9 on the next item. Thank you.
Yeah, let's go 5 to 9.
is the Ascot Placemaking Supplementary Planning Document. So it's a recommendation to Cabinet to adopt it. This SPD is providing a more detailed framework around guidance on new development in the Ascot strategic placemaking area, in particular around design, illustrative materials, public realm, and obviously a particular focus around the high street and coordinating provisions for the local community. So do we have public speakers or first?
Councillor Bond first, then after this presentation, then bring public speakers.
Okay.
It makes sense.
Yeah. How much time? If we just give them, yeah, if we can keep it to a reasonable, the presentation it has, that would be great. Thank you.
No problem.
Over to you, Councillor Beaumont.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for inviting me to Place ONS session this evening. So I'm happy to have the opportunity to speak about the draft adoption version of the Ascot Placemaking Supplementary Planning Document, which is in Appendix B of the report, and explain why I believe, following a lengthy journey, we now have arrived at a version of the SPD that provides the necessary framework to achieve a much-needed improvement and enhancements to the area, including the rejuvenation of the High Street. The Borough Local Plan, adopted by the previous administration in 2022, includes policy QP1C, which defines the Ascot strategic placemaking area. It sets principles for the placemaking and the requirement to set up further guidance through this SPD. In that sense, this document is more than simply a planning tool, but sets out a vision for the future of Ascot, a future that is vibrant, connected, and community-focused. That is why we have taken the time to really engage and evolve this document, because it is important that we get it right. Let me share with you some of the key benefits of adopting this SPD. I'll start off with a practical one, which is that it provides a stronger position for the council in planning decisions. Because whilst it's not a part of the statutory development plan, the SPD is a powerful material consideration in planning decisions. It strengthens the council's hand in negotiations with developers, helping us secure better design, infrastructure contributions, and outcomes for the community. Secondly, it provides a clear and detailed framework for growth. The SPD provides a comprehensive and locally tailored framework to guide new development in the Ascot area. It ensures that future developments are not only high quality, but also well integrated with the existing character of Ascot, preserving its green leafy charm whilst embracing modern needs. So, thirdly, I'll come to what I mentioned at the start, which is the revitalisation of the High Street. So at the heart of this plan is the rejuvenation of the High Street. The SPD outlines improvements to the public realm, wider pavements, better crossings, more green spaces, making the High Street a more attractive, accessible and enjoyable place for residents, visitors and businesses alike. It provides coordinated infrastructure delivery. So the SPD helps us plan and deliver the infrastructure Ascot needs, from transport improvements and cycleways to community buildings and open spaces. It ensures that development is supported by the right infrastructure at the right time in the right places. The next point I want to make is the fact that this is a community, it's been community driven and highly consulted upon. So this document has been the result of extensive engagement. So we've conducted resident surveys with over 550 responses, many workshops with local schools, drop-in sessions for feedback from residents, businesses and developers. The formal statutory consultation was conducted over an 8-week period ending in January this year, with 129 representations from individuals and organisations. The consultation statement in Appendix C goes into great detail on the Council's conscientious consideration of these representations and how the SPD was adapted in response. The final SPD reflects the community's voice. Good changes have been made in response to concerns about parking, cycleways and design flexibility. I'd like to take this opportunity to offer my thanks to the representatives from a number of local stakeholder organisations that have taken part in the reference group throughout the development of this emerging SPD. They have played a key role in providing critical challenge, and I firmly believe the document is now in a better place because of this. So in conclusion, adopting the Ascot Placemaking SPD is a commitment to shaping a better future for Ascot. A future where development is guided in a thoughtful way, infrastructure is coordinated, and the community's voice is a part of the inevitable changes that the BLP brings. I really look forward to listening to the panel's questions and debate on this SPD. But before that, I believe officers have a short presentation that they'd like to provide to give you some extra detail about this document. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ian, is it Ian? Ian, if you could help by presenting your slides.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Councillor Bermange. I'm Ian Magdalow, Principal Planning Policy Officer at RBWM. I've been involved in the SPD work from the start of the process. So conscious of time, and I'll try and skip through some of the slides where they perhaps we can speed up a bit, where perhaps Councillor Bermange has covered that material. But just so what I wanted to do is focus a little bit more on the journey rather than the content. Our Councillor Bermange just sort of set out in a fair amount of detail in his introduction about the content of the SPD and why it's important. I think the journey has also been really important, and then to focus then on a few of the key issues that we know have been a particular area of concern, and explain how that journey has resulted in changes and updates to the SPD, and in the final version that we've got before us tonight. I think what is important is to just touch on what an SPD is, in terms of what it can do and what it can't do. So it is there to provide more detailed guidance to explain how policies in the borough local plan are applied and can be implemented and delivered. So it is subject to formal process and formal consultation process. It clearly does help to inform planning applications that then come forward in the area. And once it's approved, it is a material consideration in the determination of those planning applications. But what it can't do is go and create new policy or change existing policy, whether that's policy in the local plan or the neighbourhood plan. It can't allocate sites or deallocate sites that are in those plans. And on that sort of theme, really, it can't dictate land uses on land that really the council doesn't control or developers don't control. And that I think is a key issue here as well. So the other thing to mention, of course, is it is supplementary. It's supplementary to other policies that exist already. That's particularly the borough local plan, the neighbourhood plan. There are other SPDs, there are other council strategies that are relevant to this placemaking area, like local transport plan, the walking, cycling and walking plan, bus improvement plan, and so on. So it inevitably can't repeat, and probably shouldn't repeat all of that, but just try and signpost to some of those key sort of policy areas. The other key thing is, well, why are we preparing it? It's because the local plan says we will do that. It actually sets out a specific area, the placemaking area, which is that black sort of thick black line on the plan there, which is focused on the high street and around the station area as the sort of heart of Ascot to be the focus for the placemaking area. And then, as Councillor Bermange said, it's very much about delivering that vision that was started through the neighbourhood plan process, and captured as well in the local plan. I won't go into the other points there because I think they've been covered. Talk about the journey, and the journey's been important because we were conscious that so much work had already gone before us in preparing this SPD. So the work done by the community through the Prince's Foundation work, and which then was crystallised in the neighbourhood plan, and all the work that fed then into the borough local plan. So actually the starting point for this piece of work on the SPD was really a mapping exercise to make sure that we understood those plans, and to, I suppose, identify some of the common themes that were coming out from those key pieces of work in the past. And that rather kind of complicated sort of image at the bottom is actually how all the different sort of elements of those key documents map through to a number of key themes that we then identified in the early stages of preparing the document. Councillor Bermange mentioned about the stakeholders, and I just want to thank as well those people who took part as part of the Ascot reference group. So they were a group of local stakeholders, included also the developers involved with the scheme as well, schemes in the area. Met on 7 different occasions right from the start of the process, and gave us really helpful feedback all the way through the process, bringing their local knowledge and understanding, helping to shape the document, and it has been shaped by those discussions as we've gone along. Alongside that, there was an extended period of early engagement from late January through to about the middle of April 2024, and a range of activities happened there, including local workshops with the community to understand local priorities and shape the sort of document that we would then prepare before that formal consultation. And so that what came out of that early feedback was firming up on those 5 key themes or outcomes that you see on the left-hand side, and they drew very much, as I said, from that understanding of the work that had gone before, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. And then a structure really for the actual content of the SPD, which you see on the right-hand side of the slide. Then we won't go through the detail, but that reflects broadly the key contents of the SPD that we then put together. But even before we had the draft SPD sort of fully assembled, some of the feedback, particularly through the reference group, I suppose influenced some of that content as we were preparing it, particularly how we presented thinking around the High Street East, and going forward with a set of different options for different potential, what you might call priorities for the High Street, whether it should be a dedicated cycleway, whether we should focus on maintaining on-street parking, whether it needed much wider footways, and just explain the different trade-offs between those different potential solutions in the High Street. And we introduced quite a lot more in the design guidance section as well as a result of that engagement. So, range of activity in terms of the consultation on the draft SPD. I won't run through those bullet points now, but you can see we just had just under 200 individuals and organisations formally responding to the consultation. And there were 2 main ways of doing that. One, of course, was just a bit of to email in or fill in a form in terms of what people thought about the detail of the SPD, and the majority of people did that. But we also created what you might call a simpler questionnaire, which was about 5 or 6 questions, just focusing on some of those key issues, particularly around the High Street, around parking, around cycleways and the like, and just to get a snapshot of views. And we did get a number of responses there. So really the responses to the consultation were looking at those 2 different strands. There was a lot of strong feedback in terms of those written comments, particularly around parking, the lack of a strategy to deal with parking in the centre of Ascot, and issues around the shortage of parking. Many people felt there was too much focus on the provision of cycleways, especially the cycleway that resulted in the loss of on-street parking in the High Street. Too many crossings causing more congestion, wanting more detail about the nature of the community building. And from the developer's perspective, wanting more flexibility around the design guidance and a narrative around viability and concern about viability and development. The feedback on the questionnaires didn't necessarily totally mirror the written feedback. There were less questionnaires than there were feedback, but this is just one example of one of the questions, which is around the priorities for the High Street East. So those options between cycle track, wider footways and on-street parking. And the blue bar you can see there was people's sort of first preferences. And although the on-street parking, retention on-street parking came out as kind of the strongest one in terms of first choice, it was still only amounted to about 40% of the people who responded to the questionnaire, and others when you put the cycle track and the footways together, then it came out a bit more than the on-street parking option. So it was perhaps a slightly more balanced set of opinions, but albeit a preference for parking on the street in the High Street. So just coming on to those kind of key issues briefly, then I'll just run through, I suppose, what those key issues were and just how the SPD in its final form has responded to those issues. So starting with the issue of parking, the loss of parking, the lack of a strategy, also the reliance, Centre of Ascot in particular, on private landowners, in particular racecourse and Crown Estates, as providing the main source of off-street parking in particular. I think what we have tried to explain in the final SPD, and certainly in more recent conversations, is that there is a limit, going back to what an SPD can do and can't do. There is a limit to what the SPD can do in relation to parking provision in the centre of Ascot in terms of providing new parking. That effectively needs the allocation of new land. The council doesn't control land, it doesn't control parking that it can do, if you like, maximise parking on. It doesn't have that control. So it needs others to bring forward that, and that's not really the role of an SPD to do that or to effectively write a parking strategy. What it does do is put quite clear emphasis on the importance of retention of parking, where we do have controls through the planning process, directing perhaps more directly to policies in the local plan, the neighbourhood plan, that do try and safeguard and protect the parking. And the retention of the parking that's on car park 6, which is part of the central allocation for development, is a key issue that we've, I suppose, beefed up in the final version of it. The other concern was, well, making sure that developers meet their own needs for parking within their own development, so you don't get overspill issues into the high street. So that's quite strongly emphasised in the final document. And finally, that choice between those three options in the high street, so the SPD is clear around the third option being the retention of on-street parking on either side of the high street, and not going for much wider walkways or the segregated cycleway. You can still improve the width of the walkways a little bit by taking out the central reservation, but not as much as one of the options that we were suggesting. Moving on to active travel, particularly around walking and cycling, and I suppose the degree to which that is connecting with communities, but also the concerns around perhaps an overemphasis on cycling routes and the cost related to that. I think it's fair to say we think it's important that SPD does put the building blocks in for improving walking and cycling in Ascot, particularly the key link between station, coming up Station Hill to the edge of the High Street, and then down High Street West to the Heatherwood end of Ascot. So those are retained as proposals in the document, but with flexibility in terms of which side of High Street West that cycle route might go. But as I said before, taking out the cycle route down the heart of the High Street East, in response to the feedback that we received. We recognise one of the concerns that came up from various stakeholders was where, again, it involves third-party land. Some of the ideas we put forward in the draft about improving connectivity across third-party land, whether that was Ascot Wood or whether that was racecourse or Crown Estate land, we've drawn back from some of those proposals because we can't control it, we can't necessarily implement without that agreement. And they may come forward in other ways in the future, but it's not for this document. On the community building and the village square, there was general support, and they were high priority things from the community's perspective in terms of the feedback, but people wanted more detail, particularly around the community building and its size. The SPD already indicated what the best location would be for community building and the village square, and emphasised again that they need to be co-located. What we've done in the final document is set out more detail on the types of community uses that may need to be accommodated within the community building. That's partly drawing on information the parish council shared with us, as well as referring back to some of the earlier work on this from the Princess Foundation work and the neighbourhood plan. Now that earlier work does refer to size. We think it's more important to focus on what those uses are, and then a building is designed around the intended use rather than be over specific about size. Last couple of sort of main issues to just highlight. One is around the comprehensiveness or securing the comprehensiveness of development and the coordination between developers and the coordination of delivering infrastructure and the different elements to that in terms of the phasing, the timing, the equalisation of costs between developers and so on. So quite an involved sort of area. I mean, I think the first thing to say is a key objective of the document is to provide that coordination, and a good chunk of the document is around design guidance on the AL16 Ascot Centre development and the adjacent short site. So that is important in terms of getting consistency and comprehensiveness by providing that guidance. That is very much the point of that guidance. There is a detailed costed infrastructure schedule that we've updated in the final version. It distinguishes between things that are probably more appropriately delivered at the site-specific level, effectively through developers, and those that are more strategic that may then be delivered either through SIL funding or by seeking external funding packages. And a key element of this, having this placemaking guidance in place, is that it's also a tool to assist in the funding bids down the line as well, because we know there will never be enough funding for everything that we're trying to achieve. There's already a narrative around viability in the document, and it cross-references to the Affordable Housing Delivery SPD that Councillor Manager mentioned earlier, which has a lot more detailed guidance on viability as well. So finally, in terms of issues, I think there was a call really for more detail on a range of other sort of topics around green space, around biodiversity, again, protection of trees, trying to introduce standards there, and also around sustainability, net zero, low carbon transport and the like. The design guidance starts to illustrate how you achieve quite a few of these things in terms of the open space, biodiversity, recognise the importance of trees, mapping those out on some of the illustrative material. But actually the policy is already there. There's strong policies in the local plan, there's policies in the neighbourhood plan that achieve those sort of objectives. And on sustainability, there's a whole sustainability SPD that we're going to go repeating in this document, but it provides a lot of guidance there on how we move towards zero carbon solutions on development sites. Of course, there is a lot about sustainability in the document because of the range of active travel measures around walking and cycling. The infrastructure schedule also seeks contributions to improving bus services as well. So it's quite strong on that. It may not be badged as sustainability, but I think there's a lot in there on that. So we've got a couple of other slides at the end, but I won't go on to those now because of time, but they were just highlighting some of the final content of the SPD and probably covered the material, so I will stop at that point.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So we do have public speakers on this matter as well. So if I could invite Councillor Sharp to come forward as the first speaker, please. So Councillor Sharp, you'll have 3 minutes from when you start, and we'll let you know when you've got one minute remaining.
Thank you, councillors. Firstly, let me thank the officers for their efforts in getting the Ascot SPD document to this stage. This has been a very long journey for many of the people involved with this exciting project to rejuvenate Ascot High Street. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. Let me take you back, if I may. The inspiration for this whole development came about in 2011, 14 years or so back, when a group of residents saw the benefit of a double-sided high street in Ascot. So a plan was drawn up, as Ian actually mentioned a moment ago, with the Prince's Trust, one of Prince Charles's organisations. They worked very closely with the local community to come up with a plan for a rejuvenated high street. In order to develop a flourishing and new high street, there was a need for a community to be within 5 to 10 minutes walk of the Ascot Centre. This is something that Ascot had never had previously. This plan was then embedded into the neighbourhood plan, which had over 90% support at referendum, adopted in 2014, and through policy QP1C, that was then firmly embedded into the BLP. So you can see that there is and has been for a long time very strong local support for this development. As I'm sure you're aware, the BLP states that developers in the centre of Ascot must work together to come up with a cohesive implementation for the vision developed by the Prince's Trust. Unsurprisingly, each developer had their own idea.
It's 1 minute remaining.
I've got a little while to go, but I'll work my way through it. As I'm sure you're aware, each developer, had their own ideas. So to the SPD, this has been a very long and drawn out process. Councillor Hill and Beaumonge met with the local community last year, and the issues with the SPD as it stood at that time were clearly outlined. In January of this year, a public meeting was attended by 300 local people in Ascot to express their concern with the state of the SPD at that time as part of the SPD consultation process. We now have a final draft of the document, and I think it's fair to say that this is the first version that the community has seen, which reflects the requirements of the community for rejuvenated Ascot. So thank you to the officers for getting the document to this position. The document is not perfect, and there are changes which still need to be made. But I would recommend that this panel proposes to the Cabinet that all the changes suggested by the local community at this meeting and that have been emailed to you are adopted as part of the SPD prior to the document being approved.
Councillor Sharp, I've let you go way over the 3 minutes.
I've only got literally a couple more sentences.
Is there something specific you want to highlight in that?
Yes, absolutely.
I'll give you 30 more seconds, but that's it. I'm going to cut.
Sorry, we've been waiting for 2 hours whilst you've been.
It's not for discussion. I'm being fair. I would be the same with every other speaker that comes before this panel, and I have been, and all the panel members will testify to that. We have to be fair to every speaker that comes before us, and that's what I'm doing. I'm actually using my own chair discretion to allow you to go to carry on. So I'll give you 30 more seconds, and if it does go beyond that, we will cut you off.
We now have to hope that the developer is able to comply with this new SPD and deliver the new Ascot that the community has waited so long to enjoy. On top of the cumulative impact of an additional 750 homes within 10 minutes walk of the Ascot Centre, there is necessarily going to be substantial changes to the road on Ascot High Street and to handle the likely number of new users. So finding and delivering the additional parking also needs.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that's it now.
The changes.
You're going to have to stop now. Thank you. We appreciate you coming and sharing those views with us. Thank you. We'll take them into account. Patrick Crevins, I believe. Sorry, Patrick Griffin. Sorry, I didn't hear that correctly. But Patrick Griffin, you have 3 minutes when you start. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, councillors and officers. Good evening. My name is Patrick Griffin, and I'm representing the Society for the Protection of Ascot and Environs. At the Cabinet meeting in July 2024, we spoke about the 3 biggest concerns we had with the emerging SPD. They were parking, parking, parking. These concerns remain and were identified in the presentation a short while ago as being the key issue. The Ascot, Sunnyhill and Sunnydale neighbourhood today has in the order of 7,500 residences or 7,500 dwellings. With the site allocation in the local plan, the housing stock will increase by 1,100 to 8,600, an increase of 15%. The draft Ascot placemaking SPD includes a graphic called Isochrone Plan showing walking and cycle distances, including an assessment of those within 10 minutes. Within the 10-minute walking distance, there are just over 100 dwellings today in the centre of Ascot. The local plan is allocating 480 homes, SAL 16, 17 and 18, within this envelope. Note that Heatherwood is outside the envelope. This will result in a total of approaching 600 within. For residents of the 8,000 dwellings outside this envelope, some will travel by public transport, but the vast majority will travel to the centre of Ascot by car. Parking for non-residents in the draft SPD is relying on on-street parking and parking on private land, as was mentioned earlier on. Landowners and retailers for the latter can withdraw this privileged access at any time. Ascot does not have a council-owned public car park, unlike Sunninghill and Sunningdale. It is very disappointing that the council is focused on protecting existing parking for non-residential and not providing additional capacity for shop workers, shoppers, office workers and visitors as a result of new development in Ascot.
That's 1 minute remaining.
Sufficient on-site parking is essential for Ascot to become a vibrant centre. Residents today are deterred from coming to Ascot because of the lack of parking and the centre being congested throughout the day. Without additional parking, the situation will get worse or people will just not bother coming. The council will have a missed opportunity to make Ascot a place that has vibrancy, is successful, a place where people want to go. After all, isn't that what placemaking is about? Finally, we are aware that councils have received a submission about the community space required for such a cinema or art space. We support the need for this guidance to be included in the SPD for sufficient height for the tiered seating to be accommodated. We urge these concerns and this about parking are included in the supplementary papers to Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments and thank you for that. So we do have another public speaker and it's Val Beckett.
I actually don't know if mine's relevant. Can I just ask you?
You have 3 minutes to be able to ask us anything that is relevant to this topic. So no judgment.
Do I have to
You have your 3 minutes. And it's already on, so when you want to start.
I've lived in Ascot for 77 years and on St George's Lane for over 40 years. Ascot used to be a vibrant village with a variety of shops along the high street and good public transport. It has now become just a busy through road. My main concerns are the engagement. Early engagement was okay, however, ongoing engagement has been inconsistent and has not considered the older residents. Our experience has been that information has been posted, emailed, shared to some, but not to all. I live in St George's Lane, and this is regarding the development around both lanes has not considered the wider implications of the ongoing management of the lane. There is no clarity on who would be accountable for the ongoing upkeep. With the additional traffic due to developments, the road surface would need regular care. Volume of traffic. We propose these ideas for consideration. We call for the council to adopt both St George's Lane and Wells Lane, which are unadopted byways at the moment, and engage with residents to identify the best approach for parking spaces, residents, tradesmen, food deliveries and visitors. We propose that all school traffic and their associated activities go through Wells Lane, leaving St George's Lane to cater for the roads residents and new developments. St George's Lane is presently saturated with traffic, as it is the only route used for all lorries, cars, vans, coaches and mini school buses. I give below an idea of the traffic we have on the lane on the 16th of June from 5:45 a.m. when it starts until 9:30 a.m. in the morning. There were 303 cars, 39 lorries, 18 vans, mini school buses, 10 of
1
those,
minute remaining.
only 5 resident cars. The total movement within that time before 9:30 a.m. was 375. Although there's a speed limit of 10 miles an hour on the lane, it's rarely adhered to. Incoming lorries deposit dirt and dust on the road, and speeding vehicles spread this further. I'm also concerned regarding the clearance of short site. Would like reassurance that tests are being conducted on the waste site, as residents have noticed a deterioration of air quality and are concerned about the possibility of toxins. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you taking the time to come here and provide that information to us as well, so we can take that into account. And some of it was based around the actual developments itself, but I think there were some key points that we definitely heard from you around traffic and parking. So thank you very much. Okay, I think that's all of our public speakers. And so I'd like to open it up to the panel. Is there anybody? I'm trying to look at visual cues here. So Councillor Carpenter, over to you first.
Thank you very much. It's a very comprehensive document. So a few questions. The first one is about the proposed village square and community building. How will it be funded? Is it going to be via a single developer? Because obviously appreciate we've got a mix of developers. Is it going to be pooled contributions from S106 or whatever, or or anything else? So or is it going to be piecemeal? Is it going to be done as a whole? So that's my first question. Also, I know that we had a question from the Ascot Sunningdale Neighbourhood Plan Delivery Group about the size of it. I know it was mentioned by one of your speakers that they were recommending it was 6.5 metres, I think, in height. So I don't know, whether that's something that could be included. I know you said that, we didn't want to mention the size, but I'm not sure, does that mean it could be a lot smaller? I don't know quite exactly what that means if we don't put anything in the plan in the first place. Got a couple of other questions. There's something about parking, obviously. Have we done any modelling on impact to local businesses if we reduce the parking? Because it sounds like parking is a big issue. And I guess, Gary, you'll bring up the thing from the parish council. Yeah, I'll leave that with you. But yeah, so, obviously, we find all the time that, it's the same, I look after a ward in Windsor, but, if it's hard to park, people won't go to those shops and, use those local businesses. So, and I know we're trying to do cycling and public transport and all that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, a lot of people still rely on their cars and they want to be able to park. It's convenient, it's quick. They just want to nip in the shops, that sort of thing. So, have we done any sort of impact assessment, if we reduce that parking? And one more, just another note. I think you've covered all the others, actually. So they're my questions for now. I might have a couple more, but I think, let's stick with those for now. Thanks.
Thank you very much. If I can go over to Ian or Ian.
Start with Ian. So the funding of the village square and the community building. So they are located within the ownership of one developer from a called London Square. We have previously submitted a planning application for that area, which they withdrew, but that had plans for a village square community building. They have since resubmitted an application, which also includes plans for a village square and community building. So the simple answer is we anticipate that developer will deliver those facilities. It's fair to say, in terms of their representations on the plan, they are one of those, perhaps not surprising, saying, you shouldn't overburden us as a developer. We're providing all this. Maybe other developers are not doing so much. So I guess when we get to that detailed negotiation on the application and the section 106 that goes with that, what we don't want to do is burden that developer so much that the scheme is unviable and it doesn't get delivered. So that is a judgment that comes through that sort of negotiation process. But the fact they put two applications in and they contain those proposals for on both those applications, I suppose, give you the broad answer to the question. The detail of is that satisfactory or not is really a matter for determination of the planning application. But
Could I just ask a follow-up question to that?
Yeah, if you, do you want to do it right now or on that one point, or can we wait?
So does that mean they will own the building? And will they run it? And that's, manage it and things.
That's a detail to be sorted out through the Section 106 agreement, but I would expect there will be community, if not ownership, or an element of community control of the open community building in particular, to be worked out in detail. The height of the building, the SPD doesn't specify the size or the height. I think in terms of the height, I'd go back to, I suppose, the point about setting out what we think are the sort of uses that should be accommodated, and put that in the SPD, which is, I think, what we tried to do. And that follows discussions with Parish Council and some more recent survey work they've done around what perhaps the priorities are in terms of community uses of that building. Then I think it's for the developer to say, well, look, this is the guidance on the uses. What is an appropriate height, rather than the SPD saying it must be 6.5 metres or 8 metres or 4 metres or whatever. So, I mean, that's where I think there's a danger of an SPD trying to specify. And yes, the issue of assessing the impact of losing parking in the high street on businesses, no, we haven't done that. But then neither is SPD now proposing to take away parking in the high street. So I suppose if we were going to pursue that line, then maybe there'd be a case for doing that assessment. Now, there are potential implications for on-street parking away from the core of the high street as a result of walking and cycling improvements, but those are areas that aren't really serving what I call the retail trade at the core of the high street. So along High Street West, it's more, some of that parking is more related, I think, to racecourse use. Down Station Hill, that parking is almost exclusively free commuter parking. So yes, it would impact on those who use that on-street parking as free commuter parking, but there is a lot of capacity at the railway station car park. We know that as a fact.
Okay,
thanks. Councillor Majid.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, we don't decide I know we keep saying it, but the height should be in there because everyone keeps mentioning that. So we can do something about that. That would be appreciated. Every single concern about the residents and the fellow councillors is about the height. And the second thing is parking. Again, going back to parking again. This is going to be a community centre, whether it's used as a cinema or any other use. I have been approached that it may be used for place of worship, so whether by a church or Sikhs or Muslims. In that situation, we do need a lot of parking, especially, for example, on Fridays when there's Friday prayers, as you're aware, the issues we have in Maidenhead. So there will be a need for a lot of public parking at that time on Sundays when churches and synagogue is used for worship as a Hindu centre also. So we do need a lot of parking to cover that, otherwise the community centre is not actually a community centre, it's only for a select few and a handful of people. So the parking issue does need to be addressed, and there needs to be a public car park which can be used by residents or shopkeepers as well. Maybe like a restriction on the timings, so we don't have commuters using it for a full time. But there does need to be a large amount of parking on that side for that community centre to be used as a community centre. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
There's two aspects of the parking, particularly in the context of what we're saying, I think, around the community building. One is principle I briefly highlighted in the presentation around development kind of consuming its own smoke, so to speak, in terms of its parking needs. So obviously there are various parking standards for residential and non-residential development, and how they're applied in the context of a planning application. And I don't want to get into the detail of the London Square application, but that will need to be assessed kind of in the light of kind of
that will be covered by the policy for development. So you need to have a certain number of parking spaces per unit. This is more for the community.
Yeah, which was I was going to go on to, I mean, there is an issue about when you have new development, how much parking does it provide, and the policies, and there are standards, and those standards are kind of currently being reviewed. They will come back to this panel in due course. The issue around providing what you might call a more general community car park is where we start to go beyond the scope of what this SPD can do, because it's effectively saying we need to get hold of a piece of land and turn it into a public car park, but the council doesn't own and control land in the centre of Ascot to do that. So, we have had conversations on an ongoing basis with obviously some of the major landowners, interests, if you like, in the centre of Ascot. I'll be honest to say it's not a quick solution, but we are, having been through the process and heard the sort of messages you're saying, heard that at various meetings and forums and conversations. We know that is a priority, but that involves cooperation with other landowners. It requires funding and maybe a funding package to bring that together, but fundamentally it requires land in a fairly central position to be able to serve the sector. And we recognise the view there that there's actually a lot of parking, like car park 3, but that is because the racecourse provide it, and we know that on certain days of the year it's clearly not available to the public. But this SPD can't sort that issue out, but it's quite. We've got a clear message that there was an issue to be taken forward there, and we have a dialogue. It's also why we beefed up what the SPD says about car park 6. I know that's down the other end of the high street from where the community building would go, but we're conscious that is very important for local businesses that level of parking at least is retained, whether it's on that site when it gets redeveloped or whether it's on another piece of land in the vicinity. It's to be determined.
So, Mr. Chairman, just want it to be noted that we do want to maximise the parking on the community centre site, so it can be actually utilised for the community, and also the height. We do want it to be high enough for a cinema to be incorporated in there. So, just for the notes.
What we can do is we can, as a panel, put forward recommendations. What we can't do is actually make the change and determine that they have to make the change. But I think the point of what you're trying to get across is to try and convey to the cabinet and to the required officers what the considerations are that we would like to be put in there, and then they can take that into account. So we've definitely noted that from your point of view that you would like to have it specifically stated in there, that there is a minimum height within the main hall, and that has been put forward as a suggestion. So
anything the two unions can do to help them too, that would be appreciated.
The difficulty that we have is that obviously within planning is that we have to allow for the developer to actually build it and make it also a viable proposition. So it's better to have a good community centre, but within the actual SPD, I think it pick up on the fact that it does state the uses, so it would have to be fit for purpose to those uses. The only thing is it does say or cinema, so it doesn't actually say, but it does say that it has to be used for a community arts centre as well. So all the things that go around that requirement, we can put forward a suggestion.
Sorry, I think from what we gathered from the community, should be or, it should be and. I believe that's what the residents are requesting.
I'm not sure that we can determine that it has to be a cinema on the developer. We'd have to
determine. I'm just saying the or should be and possibly a cinema.
It says or, so it has to allow for those uses. So it would achieve that if it was an or as well, or that. So you have to provide a provision that it could be that or that. But I'd like to go to a planning expert on that.
That's what I just probably going to say what I might.
The point. Well, there's a couple of points I wanted to make on this issue, because obviously, it's an important one for the community, and it also goes back to what Councillor Carpenter was asking at the start about how is it funded. Clearly, the expectation is it's funded from the by the provision of land as effectively a contribution in kind from the developer of that particular parcel of the AL16 allocation site. Also, also obviously they're providing funding for the actual building itself. Clearly, the more or the larger that building becomes, you start to push up against questions of viability on the scheme as a whole. And we know that viability becomes a question of can we deliver the affordable housing? I know in the two schemes they've already put forward in applications previously, they have been able to achieve the 40% affordable housing as for the pro forma of the site. And clearly we would not want to jeopardize that possibility on something where perhaps, although there's a desire, we're still not quite at the stage where we've got an evidence base to show that that is the most viable need for that community centre. In terms of funding, though, as well as the contributions that the developer on that site would have to make, there may be opportunities to look at other ways of funding something beyond what would be viable, and we need to look at that. So a really good example is the fact that the parish councils in the area, of course, with the neighbourhood plan adopted, are able to retain 25% community infrastructure levy. We have had informal discussions about that and the possibility that there may be an opportunity to augment what is deliverable in the developer scheme with with additional funding from that neighbourhood still. So that's just one example where you could do that, and think a bit more, think about a bit more outside the box of how you could deliver that.
Okay. So, for clarification, the financial burden is not just going to be on this developer; it's going to be on the other developers on the high street as well. So the cost will be spread between. You mentioned Car Park 6, I think Carla Homes. So is that and I think the Heatherwood Hospital, there's probably some still money from there. So that cost is not going to be just on this developer, is it? It's going to be spread on all the other developers.
The provision of the village square and the community building is on that one developer. As I was explaining to Councillor Carpenter, we don't want to be in a position where we are creating such a burden on that developer that they don't bring forward the scheme by making it unviable. So that is a process that if it's heading in that direction, we would go through that viability assessment process with them. But bear in mind, yes, that they are two important elements of what is trying to be achieved in the community through the SPD and the earlier work. There's a lot of other things too that cost a lot of money that those other developers will be contributing to, whether it's public realm improvements, whether it's addressing the parking issues and so on. So the reality is that there will be what I would call an informal equalisation exercise going on here, because different developers will be picking up different costs, and they may end up paying slightly different levels of Section 106 contributions depending on what those relative burdens are on them. But can I just come back, because it's relevant to the viability question on that site, that if you start putting a really big car park, whether it's a public car park or whether it's a developer funded car park on very close to the community centre on that land, that would have a major impact, I think, on the viability of the scheme. And so I think you have to start looking at other options for that public sort of car park. And just to answer the point around the fact it's or a cinema, though the words there, I think it's an art centre. For example, an art centre or a cinema, I think is what it says. That's just direct quote from the neighbourhood plan. So just going back to what we're saying about not trying to change policy, that's in policy in the neighbourhood plan. It's giving examples of the types of uses that might go into that building. It's not a hard and fast. It must be a cinema, or it must be an art centre. It's illustrating the sorts of things that go in there. So that's why it's expressed the way it is, because it's actually what's in the neighbourhood plan.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, and also me again. You see, I think planning as well, but there's been a lot of viability studies done when we've done planning in Maidenhead, and the builder has not had to provide any affordable housing. So I don't know how we can scrutinise this viability study so it's actually, they don't try to get out of a large car park or a community centre. What can we put in there to make sure that this viability study is robust and actually, not a way of getting out of providing a lot of parking or community centre or affordable housing like we have done some cases in Maidenhead.
So there's quite clear guidance set down nationally on how you go about doing viability assessments. So the developer would need to follow that. I mentioned earlier that we've got the Affordable Housing Delivery SPD. Now that has got quite a lengthy section on viability assessments. It goes a bit further than what government policy says. It's getting more specific about how they should go about their viability assessments and what can be factored in, what can't be. When we go through that process on individual applications, the developer will submit a viability assessment. They will then pay for us to employ an independent viability advisor to then look at the numbers in detail and basically take a view as to whether that guidance is being followed and whether the assessment is robust. So it is a robust process. Sometimes there are viability issues, sometimes they're not. And clearly when we draw up the local plan and set requirements for things like affordable housing policies and percentages and so on, we do a viability assessment through the local plan to make sure that in broad terms the burden on developers about right, that we're pushing things as far as we can, but not pushing it too far that we make development unviable.
Ian,
one quick point about the idea of a minimum height of say 6.5 meters. This is, as far as I know, a new point that wasn't raised during the public consultation or indeed at any point before very recently, possibly even tonight. So it's quite late in the day to be maybe bringing forward issues that maybe could have been brought forward through consultation. But more than that, I think it feels to me a very specific and perhaps too specific point in terms of where is the evidence, I suppose, to justify a particular height? So I would say alongside, the fact that we believe that having a minimum floor space of 750 square meters is too specific. We would also, I think, believe that would be too specific for this SPD.
Sorry, the height may not have been mentioned. Sorry. Mr. Chairman, the height may not have been mentioned, but the cinema is mentioned in the plan. And that height, I believe, is based on the fire station in Windsor. So that's where that's come from. But, okay, the height wasn't mentioned, but the fire station, the cinema was mentioned. It's in the SPD. So you would expect it to be 6 foot or 6 meter or 5 meters. You'd expect it to be high enough for a screen to go in there, plus the chairs as well.
So if we look, I think these are referring to the DES 16, which is in the SPD, says about the community centre, and it says that the neighbourhood plan indicates that it should be next to or fronting the village square and capable of use as a community hall and an arts centre or small cinema, and that is to respect the neighbourhood plan. I think what it is that it was brought to us, and I think Councillor Majid is trying to represent the view of somebody that would have come here and tried to present the same question. So that's why the question's being asked. And obviously, listening to your question, you're saying you can't be specific in height. So maybe it should be what they're really asking is to make sure that it's strong enough that it says capable of use. Is that maybe we could reword that so that it is actually referencing other similar or nearby facilities that are delivering the same type of service, such as like the fire station. So they could look at that and say when in planning, is it similar or will it be capable of? So where's the measure of capability? It just says capable. So it might be better if we can just include some sort of reference to a similar facility that provides the same services. Because I know you say it only came in late, but that's the point of our panel, is we're asking questions, right? And we're representing questions, and that's why the question's being asked. We only have one chance at doing this, and that's why we're asking. That's why we want to do it. This is a huge investment in Ascot and a massive change for them. So we want to try and make sure that we do look at these things. So I think, in my own opinion, is, and we're hearing what you're saying, is being specific about 6.5 meters. That might not be like palatable or easy to put across from a planning perspective. But that we can actually in an SPD make more of a suggestion that it should be referred, the capability of it to deliver that. They should be referring to the provision of the same service in a similar, or regional location. As an example, the fire station.
Sorry, I'd just like to be noted that the residents are very grateful to Councillor Vermont and Councillor Hill and the officers for all the work that they've done and all the consultations. So it's not critical of the actual report. It just extra requirements which could be put in if possible.
Okay. So
thank you for all the work.
If I can also, I've just been informed that actually the assistant head of planning has joined the meeting. And so we do have an expert in the room that can actually speak to such things as the viability for us to even include that, and the weight that the SPD will give to that. So can we get some input from Adrian?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I indicated because I just wanted to come in because I thought there was a lot of focus on the viability points, whereas actually a lot of these things are to do with the hierarchy of documents, and you have a hierarchy of documents that starts at your development plan, goes through the SPD, and then you have the actual planning application that deals with a lot of detail. And I think some of the answers to some of the questions that have been asked actually lie within how the final planning application's dealt with, rather than viability or this document, because there are lots of pushes and pulls in a planning application. So, for example, when members were talking about providing the parking, there's only so much space on a site, so providing more parking either impacts on the amount of public open space or the actual size of the community facility, etc. So there is a level of detail and a level of flexibility that it is actually really important we leave to the planning application to deal with, because that's the only point where there is enough detail to work through all of those issues. So it was just that point I just wanted to come in and provide a bit of clarity on, in case that's helpful.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think what we'll probably do is, because Councillor Majid, and obviously this is a point that you've been wanting to make, is, are you satisfied if we're not specific on an actual height, but that we do actually put forward a suggestion that they put something in there that makes sure that they reference to other facilities that provide the same service, which is clearly within the neighbourhood plan? So we're respecting the neighbourhood plan. Would that be something that we could put forward as a panel, without the specific 6.5 meters, but that it should be at a height that, or it should be constructed so that it can deliver that based on?
If you can put 6.5, it would be good. If not, then the next thing we'll do.
Yeah, I think that we're probably getting into the detail of like what needs to be done as planning, and when it goes before planning, they'll have to take into account the SPD. So what we put in there is that it should be capable based on the delivery of other facilities. Yeah. Okay. Is there any other questions that you had, or
no? That's it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other panel members that have questions relative to this SPD? Councillor C.
Yeah, I would. I think most of the stuff's been said really. I think it's a good document overall. It shows vision. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity to get this right. My only sort of concern is that sort of, we sort of, there's issues with the parking and this community centre, and we've really got to get these things right and usable for the residents. Years ago, I remember when I was growing up in Maiden, about 30 odd years ago, there was a big white elephant cinema that was built in the town centre on the waterway. That cinema was built because it was forced on the developers by the council. The cinema never opened. 30 years later, it was knocked down, and then there was a apartment building built on it. So I just think we just got to be really careful with this space. There are conversations, obviously. They want a height to be 6.5 meters. The key thing I think to note is that it's a flexible space. If they can have the tiered space, tiered seating in there and additional parking, and whether, I'm not saying put all the pressure on the developer, but whether there's something at the RBWM, with conversation with the developer, if we can contribute some of the seal money or do some sort of joint venture in terms of this community space, or pull money from other sites. I don't know if there's conversation you can have. Just want to make sure that it's right. It's probably not something you can amend in the SPD, but it's just probably, now we've got officers here, just something we should be really mindful. I'm sure you are, but just to make sure it's right for residents, because at the end of the day, they want them to be living there and using it, and that's why we're making all this effort for this document. Thank you.
Thanks. I don't know that there's a question. It was just putting forward a point. I do have a question that I need to ask and that I want to represent. So it's been brought to me because they couldn't attend, which is the parish council, and the parish council. It's going back to the proposal for parking. So it's talking about DES 24, and they are asking if it can be changed. The suggestion being that parking levels aren't really sufficient, but they need actual improvements, and so that we should be angling the SPD towards improving the current state rather than just replicating or replacing like for like. Under the DES 24, it says that any proposals for changes to the High Street East, which is where we said that a lot of the parking would come from, is it resulting in the loss of on-street parking, will need a satisfactory alternative to be identified and delivered. What they'd like to present is, could it be considered that any proposals for changes to High Street East resulting in the loss of any parking, so it's on street or off street, will need, and they say need an improved alternative to be identified and delivered. That way that they can ensure that any changes resulting from the colour application at the parking of the rear of Hermitage Parade, it won't result in diminished provision, but actually an improvement in the provision, because obviously the parking issue is what's been raised mainly here. So I just wanted to get your feedback on their proposal that they should be looking for an improved alternative, not just a satisfactory alternative. I'm asking you questions. Sorry.
Perhaps I was going to chip in. We were quite careful in the way we constructed that principle. In fact, we changed it quite a bit from the draft on the back of some of the comments we received, because it can only really relate to if a developer or landowner controls some parking. What happens if they want to build on it? What happens to the parking? Or I suppose if the council, as authority that controls on-street parking, does something that would result in the loss of on-street parking. But in the scenario of the developer, require developers to replace a certain level of parking or parking. We can only ask them to mitigate the impact of the development. So an example would be the car parks that we referred to as Parade, which is in private ownership. The the landowner has made representations on the SPD. They said they might want to redevelop it. So, but to say, well, if you're going to redevelop it, you've got to provide 100 spaces, even though you're only losing 75, it's just not be a reasonable position to take from a planning perspective. So I think there was an issue there. The bigger point, I guess, about, well, can you improve the overall stock of car parking in the centre of Ascot by some initiative with the existing landowners? But it's kind of it's outside the planning control. It's about working with landowners locally to secure a site where, yeah, maybe you can identify a site that provide more than just replacing something somewhere else. Maybe it can add to it, but it's not something this document control goes back to what the SPD can and can't do.
I mean, I think we also heard from one of the public speakers, and you know, one of the principles is the 5 to 10 minute walk principle. Is that when you just have the word satisfactory in there, it's like, what is the test against that? And so, you know, when I was hearing what you were saying, is like, oh, they could just say, okay, like for like, you know, we lose it, we're going to put it 20 minutes walk away. I mean, that's not a viable, or in my mind, a satisfactory alternative. When we're trying to look at a principle of having things within a 5 to 10 minute walk. So how do we actually measure that? Is there no way that we can put some sort of framework around what satisfactory looks like, that it should be respecting the principles of the 10-minute walk to the high street? If it's, then we have a loss of parking at the high street. So getting away from improved, but back to a satisfactory alternative.
I think DES 24 does do that. If you look at the last paragraph, if you like, in DS 24, it says, where proposals in the centre of Ascot require alternative car parking to be provided, the alternative should ensure that parking is replaced in full, either on site or in a location close to High Street East, in a way that it ensures it serves the shops, businesses, and other uses of High Street East and is well connected to the centre of Ascot. So it's basically saying it's got to be close, it's got to serve the centre of Ascot and the retail centre of Ascot. So putting it 10 minutes walk down the road is not doing that.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that. Like, by having that wording, it actually, what you're saying is it's better than a 10-minute, like putting an actual framework around it, because but we say that, but we look at, and hear me out on this, if you look at Vickers Way car park as an example, then somebody might have said that that was a satisfactory replacement for a centre of town car park. But we get so many people saying that is not a satisfactory replacement because it's too far away. No one's going to walk from there to the high street and walk back. You know, people have difficulty in doing that. Now, in your opinion, would, in that scenario of the high street in Maidenhead and Vickers Way, and hopefully you know both of them, would you say that would pass the test of what you have written in the SPD? Or would you say that that wouldn't have passed the current test in the Ascot SPD?
This is the one. This is the one on the other side of the railway line near Lidl's. That
correct?
Yes. It serves. It would serve more longer term parking, wouldn't it? And it would serve station parking, maybe more so than the heart of Maidenhead shopper parking. But I don't. I mean, I've no knowledge of all the debate around that, but I can see why some people say it's a fair.
The purpose of that car park, Mr. Chairman, was for commuters rather than.
Sure, but I know I'm using it as an example of the distance from there to the high street, just to get an idea of conceptualizing what does satisfactory achieve, and the rest of what you said, that it is meeting the needs of the high street. So would that scenario or that example meet the needs of the high street of Maidenhead, like the equivalent in the Ascot scenario?
It's also how easy and how direct can you walk from that car park to the shopping area, to the high street. I mean, you can go along the river, but there's a footpath there, but they have to divert in terms of circling around the road, would be my recollection. But I mean, what I'd envisage in the Ascot sort of scenarios, and of course it does start to impinge on certain landowners. We are talking, clearly Crown Estate and Racecourse are the key sort of players here. They control most of the land that is close to the retail centre, but not in the retail centre, and hence conversations with them. But if you're most of the way down the road to Heatherwood, then it's not going to meet that criteria, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry. Yes, Chair. Thanks. Sorry, I didn't follow. So are you saying that you vision a multi-storey car park there by the Crown Estates land on the racecourse or by the community centre? Where are you talking about the vision? Where's that coming from?
Don't want to talk specifically about that.
I wasn't trying to send you down a multi-storey car park scenario or model. I was just trying to equate the distance and the location of it, because we've had car parks put in places that, I'm just trying to understand. You said that what's written in the SPD should support and secure the adequate parking if it was to be lost.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to kind of try to conceptualize it by using an example. What I'm not saying is I'm expecting you to build a multi-storey car park in Ascot, like a certain distance away, but I just wanted to try to understand whether that what's written in the SPD would help actually protect against something like that, where it's not in my mind, not a usable alternative or a satisfactory alternative.
And I think it does, because it talks about serving the close proximity and serving the high street, and about connection to the high street. So hence, if it is can you walk there quite directly if it's not right next to it? I suppose it's part of the test that's kind of written in there. Clearly, you're talking about a limited number of options here in terms of land, which I don't think it's probably appropriate to go into tonight.
No, I understand that you're just framing it in the SPD, that it has to be considered within a planning application. When they bring it forward, it has to be taken into account.
Yeah, and the way we read past this guidance is to direct people back to what the local plan says about the loss of infrastructure. Car parking is defined in the local plan as a form of infrastructure. So if you lose important infrastructure that serves that community, then policy of the local plan talks about replacement. And that's why we tried to express it in those terms, because it actually gives it more weight by referring back to that policy, just, dare I say, vital principle in the SPD document, bearing in mind the SPD and what Adrian was saying earlier about the hierarchy of plans. It's not at the top of the hierarchy, the local plan is at the top and has the most weight. So taking it back to the policy gives you the most strength in terms of trying to apply that principle.
Thank you very much.
Just one final clarification.
Councillor Majid.
Sorry, just thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the moment, the off-street parking is there's no restriction on it, so commuters park there in the morning and leave and come back at night time. I mean, this doesn't cover that, or will that be covered as part of planning? If there's a new parking which is provided, will it be restricted to 2 hours or 1 hour, or will it be the same what they've actually lost?
Well, I mean that's a whole parking strategy question, because you're right, there's quite a lot of controls that are on the high street. As you say, it's completely free to park down Station Hill. Some of the roads don't have any restrictions on. I think there's a wider issue about, do you need to review controls to make the best use of the parking resource that you've got there?
And as a panel, we have got the parking SPD coming before us, so that will be borough wide. So we have got another chance to talk about parking, although that's more residential orientated. But there is another opportunity to do that. We need more parking as well. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I don't think we have any more questions, and what we will do is we will put together. There was a potential suggestion that we will draft up around the community centre, and we'll just put that forward to cabinet as a suggestion. But apart from that, I think we've asked all our questions. Thank you very much. We really appreciate you put a lot of effort into this, and actually the consultation with the community, and actually theming things around exactly what they were after and driving for. And I can see that you've incorporated that into here. So there's always challenges around parking, so yeah, sorry, Ian, you want to make one more point?
I just wanted to really just thank some of the, Ian to my right, and some of the officers such as Angela online for all their, hard work, and they put a tremendous amount of work into this. And we'd obviously like to thank Councillor Bermange as well for all of his input, and Councillor Hill. They played a really critical role, and obviously all the community as well. So just wanted to thank everyone for their really useful input, and also for tonight as well. Really helpful comments.
Thank you. Good night.
Yeah, thank you very much. And so we just have one more thing. We had a work programme, but we won't talk about that tonight because we don't have time.
You can do it online.
And we'll do it online. And so on that note, we can close the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well done. Thank you, everyone.